Chapter 1278, Teasing. Chapter 1278, Teasing. As Xing and Wei Yun were in the fantasy zone, this miraculous place had projected dozens of illusions from their real bodies. However, they were just illusions without the ability to attack. However, something strange happened. Dozens of their illusions suddenly became lively as if they had lives. Their vitality and power surged, breaking the mirrors to storm toward the real bodies and attack them. Xing cultivated lightning and thunder power Upanishad, and Wei Yun cultivated a rare cloud power Upanishad. Xing soul moved and his incipient extent arose with exploding lightning strikes. The commotions inside his incipient extent were earth-shaking. Several thousand lightning bolts as big as massive snakes in Xing incipient extent became real after he had poured his god power in them. They then congregated into a massive lightning river. Thunder reverberated and lightning flashed, sending dazzling sparks with destructive power. The lightning river had covered Xing illusions before they could reach him. Wei Yun made one hand seal. As soon as the hand seal appeared, dozens of thousands of the 5-colored clouds including orange-red, black, blue, gray, and white appeared. These bright clouds were like big balloons hovering around him. Each of the clouds had Wei Yun's power and his life seal. Dozens of Wei Yun's illusions were confined by his clusters of clouds as if those clouds were really sticky. Xing and Wei Yun were at incipient god realm with profound cultivation bases. When they saw the illusions change, they thought that the warriors of the 1000 Fantasy sect had attacked them. They immediately released the incipient extent to use the marvelous abilities of their power Upanishads to resist. They were afraid that they would fall into a disadvantaged situation. However, they had overestimated those illusions. Although they had urged the power of their incipient extent with special abilities, they eventually found that those illusions were actually illusions. The lightning river and the brilliant clouds had smashed the illusions directly and left nothing. Looking at the layered space out there, the illusions of their reflections appeared again, which weren't different from the previous ones. They felt defeated as if they had just used all of their power to hit the void. The long lightning river and the 5-colored clusters of cloud were so intimidating above their heads. However, the two experts looked stiff and they stood there bewilderedly. Ban Yu looked at Shi Yang and felt panicked. The warriors of Tsunami Chamber of Commerce around also looked at Shi Yang and laughed discreetly. They knew that Shi Yang was tricking the others because they had seen Shi Yang's awesome deed previously. Cough. Cough. Ban Yu gave a slight cough, frowning and his gaze raking through his staff. Wei Yun and Xing were baffled. They glanced at Shi Yang and found something. There was no illusion of Shi Yang in that layered space. They immediately knew that Shi Yang had a special understanding of this fantasy zone and was able to use it to affect the illusions here. Eventually, Xing and Wei Yun knew that those illusions looked intimidating but they didn't have a bit of power. Shi Yang had teased them. Xing and Wei Yun were enraged. They could see that Shi Yang was purposely teasing them. Too humiliating. Inside the room behind Shi Yang, Ouyang Luo Shuang was surprised. Her white jade face was sparkling, her heart discreetly shocked. It had been so many years since she saw Shi Yang. This time, it was just by chance. When she met Shi Yang, she found hope. However, when she found that Shi Yang had only incipient god realm, she had dismissed this hope. She knew that she couldn't get rid of it easily. Thus, when she looked at Shi Yang, she didn't have any begging thoughts reflected in her eyes. She didn't want Shi Yang to rescue her. It was because she thought that Shi Yang wasn't an equal match to Wei Yun and Xing. If he tried to help her, he would be in big trouble. She didn't want him to get involved. However, after that, Shi Yang was haughty enough to call Caesar's name. He even said that he would talk to Caesar about this and that even Caesar wasn't qualified to teach him. It had astounded Ouyang Luo Shuang a lot. Just like Ban Yu, she thought that Shi Yang just talked nonsense. She knew how strong the Broken Hall was. She knew that the number of people who dared to offend the Broken Hall could be counted with the fingers of one hand. She also thought that Shi Yang was just stupidly arrogant. Right after that, Shi Yang had used the abilities of his space power Upanishad to tease Xing and Wei Yun. The others had tried their best power to attack nothing, which made her feel both funny and panicked. She was afraid that Shi Yang couldn't bear the flame of rage from the other two. She became restlessly anxious. And now, her worry became true. Xing Shan and Wei Yun had aimed their attacks at Shi Yang. The river with lightning bolts and 5-colored clusters of clouds fell from the sky under Xing Shan's and Wei Yun's control. They had thundering momentum that pressed down. It was over. Ouyang Luo Shuang couldn't help but close her eyes and sigh. She felt a little shame as Shi Yang was in trouble because of her. 8. She heard Ban Yu screaming in fear. She was surprised, her eyes wide open. A beautiful light bloomed in her pretty eyes. The long lightning river and countless clusters of clouds pressing down had disappeared strangely, as if they had disappeared into thin air altogether. Shi Yang disappeared with them too. Just like her, Xing Shan, Wei Yun, Ban Yu, and Tsunami Chamber of Commerce's warriors were astounded. They felt bewildered while they scanned around to find something instinctively. Ouyang Luo Shuang wanted to know what had just happened. Why is that? Ban Yu muttered. He could see clearly that at the glimpse the lightning river and the brilliant clouds descended, Shi Yang, their target, suddenly grinned as his hands pulled something. Just pulling once and something happened miraculously, as if he had changed the nature's rules. He could even condense or tear the void as he pleased. Ban Yu didn't understand space power Upanishad or what was mysterious about Shi Yang's pulling gesture, but he knew that Xing Shan's and Wei Yun's terrifying attacks had disappeared with that pull. It was like an invisible space had swallowed them directly and sealed them in an unknown space. And Shi Yang had disappeared altogether. Look! All of a sudden, a warrior of Tsunami Chamber of Commerce screamed, his shaking finger pointing in a direction. Everybody looked in that direction. It was an area in the layered space where there were 7 transport ships that held Ban Yu, Xing Shan, Wei Yun, and everyone here. Besides them, there was one more person and 2 more wonders. Shi Yang was there standing on the ship as if he had never moved. The lightning river and countless 5-colored clusters of clouds halted above his head as if he had paused them all. In that area, they remained their same postures and were staying put. Only Shi Yang was grinning and walking towards them. Freaking weird. Everybody felt the hair rise on their napes. They were aghast as if they were encountering ghosts. They felt so insecure. Even Ban Yu, Xing Shan, and Wei Yun weren't exceptions. Although they had the incipient God Realm cultivation base, they didn't know what was going on here or how to cope with it. In their eyes, Shi Yang could confine the space, weave through layers of space, distort it, or make it disappear. He seemed to be able to do anything. In this fantasy zone, Shi Yang was terrifyingly mysterious. They felt that it would be tough to counter him. Xing Shan and Wei Yun were baffled for seconds. Their faces darkened and then they looked at Ouyang Luo Shuang in the cabin. They knew clearly that they were really here and the space that had Shi Yang over there was just the reflection of their space. As long as they could still confine Ouyang Luo Shuang in the real world and deliver her to the fantasy star, their mission was complete. They would choose to forget this section of fighting Shi Yang in this fantasy zone. They would never mention it with anyone else. I told you. I will explain this to Caesar. However, Shi Yang's cold voice came from every direction as if there were dozens of Shi Yang shouting at the same time. Ban Yu's and Xing Shan's eardrums were grumblingly shaken as if they heard sudden thunderclaps. Boom, boom, boom. Just like a broken mirror, many layers of space that normal people couldn't see shattered grumblingly. Billions of pieces of broken space shot out like flying sabers. In that glimpse of time, the fantasy zone seemed to become a meat grinder that could crush everything including the bodies and the souls. Ban Yu discolored in fright and shouted ear-splittingly, "Don't! Our Tsunami Chamber of Commerce isn't involved in this." Tsunami Chamber of Commerce's warriors were frightened. They tried to ride their war chariots to dodge those shooting pieces. They were scared that those fatal things would destroy their souls. Xing Shan and Wei Yun were the experts at incipient God Realm, so they knew that the pieces of the shattered space were the sharpest things in this world. Seeing billions of fragments attacking, they exchanged looks and turned into a lightning bolt and a cluster of cloud running away in an unknown direction. They didn't care about Ouyang Luo Shuang, Tsunami Chamber of Commerce, or anyone else. They just wanted to save their lives. Ban Yu and the warriors of Tsunami Chamber of Commerce looked desperate when the billions of space fragments shot towards them. They regretted that they brought Shi Yang, an unknown warrior, to the fantasy zone on their ship. They understood that Shi Yang was an expert who had a profound cultivation base in space power Upanishad. This sort of warrior in the vast sea of stars were the most dangerous existences that people had to be cautious of when dealing with them. If those pieces of shattered space headed towards the fantasy star, they could even crush the entire planet. Tsunami Chamber of Commerce also had the staff cultivate space power Upanishad, so they knew how formidable it was when they used their ultimate power. They knew that the top warriors who cultivated space power Upanishad didn't need to spend a lot of efforts to destroy a whole life star. With only a thought, the entire world could vanish. It depended on their moods, though. When the countless space fragments were shooting toward them, Ban Yu's group closed their eyes and waited for their deaths. They sighed that they weren't lucky this time. They couldn't even have the thought of protesting. 2 seconds. 3 seconds. The great massacre that should have happened didn't happen. Ban Yu opened his eyes, his stiff body shivering. By his side, Shi Yang was standing quietly at his spot as if he had never moved an inch. The billions of shattered space pieces that were swarming toward them had disappeared into thin air. Somehow, it was just their hallucination that they had imagined out of nothingness. Ban Yu was bewildered for a while. Then, he clasped his hand and tried to force a smile. "Buddy, don't tease us. I'm not young anymore. I can't handle it. Please, in the coming part of our journey, please make it smooth. Don't scare us more, okay?" "Well, let's see about how I feel," Shi Yang smiled frankly. Chapter 1279, Primordial Spirit Lock. Chapter 1279, Primordial Spirit Lock. Shi Yang and Ouyang Luo Shuang were staying in the cabin on the transport ship. They closed the door and denied talking to Ban Yu. After Ban Yu had seen Shi Yang's spatial marvelous abilities, he knew that this young man could have extraordinary status and power. He then lifted up his cold appearance and tried to talk to him to form a relationship. Shi Yang neglected him. Inside the room, the ceiling had precious gems and pearls that illuminated the space. Ouyang Luo Shuang had snow-white skin and was sitting silently. Her clear eyes looked at Shi Yang. "Let me see if I can unchain you." Shi Yang frowned. After he had finished, he didn't care if Ouyang Luo Shuang would protest. He directly grabbed her slender, jade-like hands. He didn't pay attention to Ouyang Luo Shuang's pretty eyes to see that she was frightened. Ouyang Luo Shuang's hands were beautiful. They were white and soft. Each of her fingers was like a scallion with skin so thin that he could even see the small veins under her skin. Then, a dark bluish chain wound around her white wrists, locking her senses and her ability to talk and move. Shi Yang held her ivory-like hands and focused. The starlight filled his eyes while he gathered his star energy and sent it through her hands toward the chains. Sizzle. 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 The lightning beams winding around the chains activated. They broke Shi Yang's star energy into pieces in just a blink. Ouyang Luo Shuang's jade-like hands chilled instantly as if the cold energy had occupied them. The electrical beams shot through her veins. She couldn't help but quiver in pain. Shi Yang discolored slightly. He hurried to retreat his star energy and her hands. The cold air emitted from Ouyang Luo Shuang's hands like a white mist. In the next moment, her hands regained her body temperature while the electrical beams moving in her veins returned to the chains. Apparently, those chains weren't ordinary items. When someone touched them, they reacted terribly by hurting the one they shackled. It kept the rescuer from taking rash actions. Taking a deep breath, Shi Yang pulled himself together. He didn't touch her hands anymore, a light sparkling in his pupils. A flow of robust soul energy flew out of his soul altar. Just like a wisp of smoke, it seeped into Ouyang Luo Shuang's body. Shi Yang attempted to sense with his soul first to see what strange things had happened to Ouyang Luo Shuang. Then, he was going to decide what to do. His soul energy with the life power Upanishad like a warm sea covered Ouyang Luo Shuang. In the sea of life that he intended to create, Ouyang Luo Shuang's face glowed healthily as the pressure in her body was reduced and she felt more comfortable. Shi Yang's soul consciousness seized the chance to enter her body and head to her soul altar. Suddenly, a struggling soul came from the chains on Ouyang Luo Shuang's hands. That soul was wiggling so hard that it activated the lightning power on the chains. Quickly, the lightning beams began to crawl on her hands and expand to her entire body. Sizzle, sizzle, sizzle. The lightning bolts shot out and the burning smell filled the room. Shi Yang discolored in fear. He hurried to retreat his wisp of soul consciousness. However, it was strange that as soon as his soul consciousness got out of Ouyang Luo Shuang's body, the power of the chains disappeared instantly. Ouyang Luo Shuang looked relaxed and tired. She quietly looked at Shi Yang, her clear eyes showing her reluctant pain. "Hey, buddy. Buddy." Ban Yu called him from the outside and said sincerely, "You shouldn't do anything rash or force to break those chains. You will kill your friend altogether." Shi Yang's face became dark. He threw a look at the door and the door sprang open. Ban Yu entered the room, his face stern. "I wanted to tell you about the chains, but you didn't give me a chance. I think you should allow me to talk about it now. Tell me, how do I break these chains?" Shi Yang sounded cold. "There's no way to break it." Ban Yu forced a smile. Seeing the malicious light sparkle in Shi Yang's pupils, he was frightened, so he hastened to add, "There is a key. Each primordial spirit lock has one key. You can use that special key to unlock it quickly." Primordial spirit lock? Shi Yang frowned. "What is this lock?" "The primordial spirit lock is strange. It has the wisp of this lady's soul inside. It's fused with her soul, so if you break the chains, the wisp of her soul will be broken altogether. Then, her soul will explode. The primordial spirit lock can confine the body, the god power, and mainly the soul." "Did you find her soul struggling inside the chains when you intruded it right now?" said Ban Yu. Shi Yang nodded. It had happened exactly like what he described. When Shi Yang was about to enter Ouyang Luo Shuang's sea of consciousness, the lightning beams shot out from the chains together with her soul wiggling. Thus, he found that it wasn't right. He immediately left. Otherwise, Ouyang Luo Shuang's soul inside the chains would have burned down, which would also kill her host soul. "How come you are so familiar with this kind of lock?" asked Shi Yang coldly. Ban Yu looked embarrassed as he spoke begrudgingly. "Because the blacksmith of our Tsunami Chamber of Commerce invented this primordial spirit lock. It's one of the most expensive items that Tsunami Chamber of Commerce sells. Each set of the primordial spirit lock has only one key. Without this key, if he forcefully unlocked the chain, the host soul of the victim will perish altogether. It isn't easy to get this primordial spirit lock. Each set of them is extremely expensive, so only the rich forces like the Broken Hall, the Thousand Fantasy Sect, or the Heaven River Temple could buy them. If they use this special lock to confine this lady, I think her identity isn't ordinary." Ban Yu's eyes sparkled. He studied Shi Yang to see his reaction. Shi Yang didn't fail him. His reaction was extreme. He cursed directly. "Your Tsunami Chamber of Commerce lacks morality. You guys are despicable, indeed. The blacksmith who invented this primordial spirit lock shouldn't reproduce. If I meet this guy, I will confine him in the middle of the chaotic space and shatter that space. I will let him taste the feeling of his soul and body dividing into different spaces." Ban Yu paled instantly. Shi Yang's eyes were so cold. He looked at the man and grinned fiendishly. "Well, do you so happen to be that bastard?" No. Ban Yu shook his head continuously. He was more panic-stricken as he gave a dry smile. I haven't reached such level in blacksmithing. If I was that excellent, I wouldn't be here now." Although the blacksmith who had invented the primordial spirit lock wasn't Ban Yu, he was a precursor in Ban Yu's family. It was that precursor's merit that allowed Ban Yu to join Tsunami Chamber of Commerce and become the captain of a transport fleet. Ban Yu mentioned this to increase his value. However, Shi Yang's reaction was extreme, so Ban Yu had to curse himself for his bad mouth. "Well, better that it's not you." Shi Yang gave a faint smile and then shouted. "There is no other solution besides using the key." No solution." Ban Yu shook his head. However, after a moment, he thought of something. "Oh, right. There is a solution. I heard that an immortal realm expert can draw the soul out of the chain. Then, he could use his supernatural power to break the chain. He looked at Shi Yang, bent his body slightly, and cried, "With your position and status, I think it won't be difficult to find an immortal realm expert to help her, right?" Before Shi Yang had fought Wei Yun and Xing Shang, he used to boast arrogantly and didn't show respect to Caesar. At that time, Ban Yu thought that Shi Yang didn't know the immensity of this world. However, after the battle against Wei Yun and Xing Shang, Ban Yu had to change his opinions about Shi Yang when he knew Shi Yang got the space power Upanishad. He began to doubt that Shi Yang perhaps held a noble status and that he might have been telling the truth that he was qualified to talk with Caesar. Thus, he had tried to create a good relationship with Shi Yang to know his real identity. If Shi Yang was that sort of character, he had to be servile to him for sure. Thus, he proactively lowered his status when talking to Shi Yang. Shi Yang looked at Ban Yu and sneered discreetly. He knew what this man had in his head. "I don't know any immortal realm expert." "Oh, so when you talked about Caesar," Ban Yu was baffled. "Oh well, you're pretty old but you're still that innocent." "Of course, I was trying to scare the two experts of the Broken Hall. Didn't you see that?" Shi Yang sounded ironic. Ban Yu paled. He snorted, his eyes filled with disappointment. He walked out of the cabin directly. Since Ouyang Luo Shuang was chained by the primordial spirit lock, she couldn't move or talk. However, she could still hear and see them. Just like Ban Yu, she was now filled with disappointment. She had hoped that Shi Yang could know someone at the immortal realm that could help her unlock this primordial spirit lock. However, hearing what Shi Yang had just said, Ouyang Luo Shuang's hope vanished. She felt begrudgingly upset. "What kind of look is that?" Shi Yang snorted. He could see her disappointment. "Don't worry. I will help you remove this primordial spirit lock thing. If I can't find an immortal realm expert, I can find the key, right? Why are you looking at me like I'm a hoax? Are you kidding me?" Ouyang Luo Shuang sighed, but the disappointment in her eyes remained. She had heard from Xing Shang and Wei Yun that Xing Ming kept the key of the primordial spirit lock on her wrists. As Xing Ming was at third sky of incipient god realm and kept the main power of the Broken Hall with only one person, it was like giving the sheep to the wolf's mouth when Shi Yang wanted to take the key from him. She didn't believe that Shi Yang could take the key from Xing Ming. She was so worried that she wanted to tell him not to do that. Unfortunately, she couldn't talk. Ouyang Luo Shuang's soul was also restricted, so she couldn't use her soul to communicate with Shi Yang. Shi Yang watched her for a while and then felt bored. He didn't want to talk to her anymore. Thus, he sat down next to her and sank in his thoughts. He had offended the Broken Hall before he arrived at the Fantasy Star. The purpose of this trip was to get the support of the leaders of the Thousand Fantasy Sect, the Broken Hall, and the Heaven River Temple. But now, it was more difficult. He had a headache as he was considering how to deal with the three powerful monsters at the Immortal Realm when he arrived at the Fantasy Star. Chapter 1280, Guard the Tree Stump and Wait for the Rabbit. Chapter 1280, Guard the Tree Stump and Wait for the Rabbit. Fantasy Star. In the middle of a lake inside a forest were some simple bamboo cottages. Early in the morning, the thick mist fumed from lake carried abundant spirit chi that made this place a wonderland from the fairy tales. Ling Xiong, Caesar, and Lorraine were staying on the islet in the middle of the lake. They were discussing the marvel of their powers Upanishads and the attainment they got after years of cultivating and comprehending the truth of natural power Upanishad. They hoped that they could gather more useful knowledge from the others to increase their realms. Now, they were learning from each other's opinions and trying to decode the secret of bloodthirstis remains. However, they failed every time. It wasn't an exception this time. They sat cross-legged inside the bamboo cottage and formed a triangle formation. 3 heavenly fragrant soul-soothing jade boxes lay open in front of them. However, bloodthirstis remains inside the boxes were invisible. Both the naked eye and the soul consciousness couldn't see it. Ling Xiong, Caesar, and Lorraine reached out their hands and touched the objects inside the boxes. They released their power at the same time, striking bones inside to see what they were hiding. However, An unknown force from the bones then counterattacked them and shook their minds hard. They had to retract their hands, their eyes tired. They shook their heads reluctantly. We haven't touched a bit of that marvelous energy. I wonder how he can comprehend it. Ling Xiong's finger quivered when he knocked at the lid of the box. After many years, I wonder if the God Lord has found anything. If someone besides Bloodthirsty could understand this power, it would be the God Lord only, I assume, Lorraine contemplated, her face heavy. After that battle, the God Lord was hurt severely. His body shattered and his soul was damaged badly. He had to slowly and quietly recover. I don't think he has spent time to learn the mysterious power from Bloodthirst's remains. Otherwise, we wouldn't have had 10,000 years of living in peace without worrying about keeping our star areas from being invaded, Caesar snorted. Ling Xiong and Lorraine nodded in agreement. They thought that whoever rumored that Caesar was just a nerd who was so passionate about learning martial arts and didn't know how to treat and manage his organization was a liar. He did have keen eyes and a thorough thought process. With the God Lord's tyrannical bearings that year, if his realm and power hadn't been affected after that battle, he would have subdued all the forces of the Thousand Fantasy Sect, Broken Hall, and Heaven River Temple and quickly make them the God Clan's dependent territories. It was because he didn't have any solution to do that. The Bloodthirst's Cortege of 8 hadn't all fallen, so the 4 great heavenly kings still had the pressure. Thus, even though the God Clan had ruled the cosmos for 10,000 years, they knew that they should behave. They didn't explicitly invade the forces that could be a threat to them like Tsunami Chamber of Commerce, Imperial Dark Tribe, the Thousand Fantasy Sect, the Broken Hall, or Heaven River Temple. I heard from Tsunami Chamber of Commerce that Ming Hao, Xian He, and Frederick notified them that they have acknowledged that Kid's master position. Tsunami Chamber of Commerce announced that he would go to the Fantasy Star to meet us 3 to discuss the alliance to be formed. What do you think about it? Said Lorraine, the master of Heaven River Temple. Ling Xiong is already prepared, Caesar squinted. Lorraine turned to Ling Xiong. What did Tsunami Chamber of Commerce say? His enthroned. According to our agreement, we will follow it. We will fight with them shoulder by shoulder. We will give the newly elected master face. Otherwise, Ming Hao, Xian He, and Frederick would blame us for not knowing how to behave. Ling Xiong's eyes were cunning as he said naturally, of course, we have to make them fight against the God Clan. And just like the time we had helped the God Clan that year, we will support them. However, we're smarter this time. We won't invest a lot of forces in this. Caesar and Lorraine nodded at the same time. Ling Xiong looked at the 3 boxes in front of them and said, we haven't figured out the power of these things. We should give them to him as proof of our sincere participation. It's best that they decode the secret of this power. Perhaps, we can receive benefits from it too. Agreed. Agreed. Lorraine and Caesar agreed with him. Deep inside the blue clouds of the Fantasy Star was a hovering group of several warriors. In front of them was the area of the Fantasy Zone with countless illusions of the Fantasy Star underneath. A girl in the light green dress was hovering in the front. Her phoenix eyes were filled with murderous intent as she was waiting for something. Don't worry, Miss Xingying. Our Thousand Fantasy Sect has sent people to pick them up. I think they will arrive soon, said an elegantly handsome young man. However, his hot eyes were deliberately scanning her slender back and ample rear end. He swallowed his saliva, his eyes lustful. Thinking about her wild and wanton characters last night, he couldn't control the heat in his body. He hated that he couldn't rip the dress off her body and put his body against hers one more time. How Feng Dage, is there a problem? Xingying turned her head to look at him. The cold countenance vanished from her face. She smiled as bright as a flower and spoke softly. Some warriors of the Broken Hall got used to her ability to swiftly change her countenances. They didn't find it weird, though. I'm sure there's no problem. I've arranged it myself. I asked Ban Yu of Tsunami Chamber of Commerce to pick them up on his way here. I think they won't have some new trouble. Don't worry. I've arranged for them. I've sent the Fantasy Butterfly Troop to get them. They should be here soon, confirmed the young man of the Thousand Fantasy Sect. Hao Feng Dieji, you're so powerful. Xingying threw him a charming look. Hao Feng laughed lustfully. His bright eyes gazed at her heavy breasts. Xing Ying was Xing Ming's daughter. Among the three forces including the Thousand Fantasy Sect, the Broken Hall, and Heaven River Temple, Xing Ying, Gulling, and Cecilia were the famous flowers that many handsome and talented young men yearned for. Different from Gulling and Cecilia, who kept their dignity, Xing Ying was famous as a promiscuous girl. She had love affairs with many young, handsome, and talented men of the three forces. The young men of the three forces thought that it was their glory to have transient relationships with Xing Ying. However, not any young man could do that. Only the young, handsome men with profound realms of the three forces could have a chance to observe her glamour. Hao Feng had craved for Xing Ying's body for years. This time, Xing Ying had come to the Fantasy Star and requested him by chance. Finally, he had the chance to taste her. Even now, he still recalled their romantic moment. While Hao Feng was still sinking in the sweet moment he had experienced last night, some beautiful, bright-colored butterflies appeared in their sights. They were as big as war chariots, but they were more elegant and tender. The warriors of the Thousand Fantasy Sect were riding them. Surprisingly, Xing Shan and Wei Yun were sitting on one of those butterflies. Earlier, Xing Ying and Wei Yun had to run away helter-skelter to dodge billions of space fragments that Shi Yang had struck. Then, they contacted Xing Ying to tell her their situation. Hao Feng had arranged the Fantasy Butterfly Troop to pick them up. They had arrived at the Fantasy Star before Tsunami Chamber of Commerce's ships. According to the report of the Fantasy Butterfly Troop, they knew that those billions of space fragments were just illusions because the Fantasy Butterfly's troops had told them that Tsunami Chamber of Commerce's ships were still heading to the Fantasy Star without a small scratch. Knowing this, Xing Shan and Wei Yun were so bitter. They clenched their jaws along the way here and thought about how to take revenge. Especially, they had ditched Ouyang Luo Shuang. Xing Ming had asked for this girl. They had messed up his business now. It made them tenser. Uncle, Xing Ying lifted her head to look at Xing Shan and Wei Yun riding the butterfly. She mocked and didn't try to be polite. Well, I heard that you've found me another stepmother. Where is she? You've lost her even if she's chained by the primordial spirit lock. You're really good. You even asked me to send someone to pick you up. Well, you have my respect. Xing Shan grimaced. He knew how fierce this niece of his could be. Although he was sullen, he didn't dare to retort. You tell me, what happened? Xing Ying snorted and turned to Wei Yun as she saw Xing Shan stay silent. Wei Yun stooped and forced a smile. He didn't dare to conceal and told her the situation. We don't know that kid, but we're sure he isn't from Tsunami Chamber of Commerce. As Tsunami Chamber of Commerce has violated the agreement by bringing some stranger here and we're the long-term partner of the Thousand Fantasy Sect, we wanted to ask Tsunami Chamber of Commerce on behalf of the Thousand Fantasy Sect. We didn't think that we would create such a commotion. What did you say? He didn't respect our hall master and he wanted to speak to him directly. Xing Ying shrieked as she heard half of the story. Her phoenix eyes were filled with rage. What is he? He dared to call our hall master's name. Wanton. We thought so. Wei Yun nodded and spoke faster. Oh well, you guys are really excellent. Xing Ying clapped her hands and coldly spoke to the other two. Two experts at the incipient god realm were teased by a kid. You've made our broken hall proud. I do admire you too. Xing Shan and Wei Yun discolored. They felt bitter but they could only lower their head to listen to her. Xing Ying looked at them for a while and then snorted. Then, she changed her visage and turned to the young man next to her with a bright smile. She asked softly, Hao Feng Dage, when will Tsunami Chamber of Commerce's ships arrive? Very soon, frowned Hao Feng. From what Xing Shan and Wei Yun had told them, he knew that Tsunami Chamber of Commerce had violated their agreement by bringing some stranger to the adjacent area of the Fantasy Star. Patrolling the peripheral areas of the Fantasy Star was his family's duty. Hao Feng was alarmed. He became more cautious. Are you sure he's not from Tsunami Chamber of Commerce? He asked Wei Yun. Ban Yu confirmed this. He told us that the young man isn't from Tsunami Chamber of Commerce. We're sure, said Wei Yun. Hao Feng nodded, threw Xing Ying a look, and smiled. Miss Ying, you and I will wait here. We'll wait for Tsunami Chamber of Commerce's ships. If it's true, you can take the woman chained by the primordial spirit lock. We want to capture that stranger to interrogate him. After that, Miss Ying can do anything you want to him. What do you think about this? Xing Ying smiled brightly and threw him a lustful glance. I listen to you, Hao Feng Dage. Hao Feng smiled, his eyes were seductive and his stance out of the ordinary. Tsunami Chamber of Commerce's merchant ship. Ban Yu wore a cold face and walked to the closed cabin. He pondered for a while and then snorted coldly. We're about to get to the Fantasy Star. You should prepare. The broken hall will not let you go easily. You'd better leave early. He didn't mention that Hao Feng had called him to pry on Shi Yang's identity. Since Shi Yang was here under the arrangement of Cold Iron City's manager, the manager Ban Yu had always respected, he knew his limit and he would never disclose the information. However, he didn't alarm Shi Yang that the warriors of the Broken Hall and Thousand Fantasy sect were waiting for him outside the Fantasy Star. They were guarding the tree stump and waiting for this rabbit. I won't bother you. When we get there, I will leave quickly. Ban Yu rubbed his nose and sneered coldly. He wanted to see if this young man could act casually when they got there. He had to stay under pressure from the Thousand Fantasy sect and the Broken Hall. Shi Yang opened his eyes to see Ouyang Luo Shuang with her clear eyes sitting next to him inside the closed cabin. Ouyang Luo Shuang was looking at him quietly too. During this time, they often looked at each other like that and vaguely found something in each other's eyes. Strangely, they could subtly understand each other that way. Chapter 1281. Posturing. Chapter 1281. Posturing. After many years of being away from each other, Ouyang Luo Shuang now had flawless, holy makings. It was because of her cultivating moonlight power Upanishad for a long time. Ouyang Luo Shuang used to be a cold and aloof woman. She was so distant to other people. However, after she got this pure, holy aura, she had become even more attractive. Perhaps it was her exquisite appearance and flawless makings that got her captured. To many men, those features of her were like a poison that they couldn't resist. To approach Shi Yang, Ban Yu had told him that Xing Ming had been a widower for many years. He was the sort of man who abandoned all kinds of restraint as he got the power from the Broken Hall. He often kidnapped beautiful women from different clans to enjoy. Recently, as his hope to break to the immortal realm was gone, his attention shifted to other things. He began to enjoy his life. Ban Yu had guessed that Xing Ming had laid his eyes on Ouyang Luo Shuang and plotted against her so Xing Shan and Wei Yun could kidnap her. Shi Yang nodded in agreement with him as he could still recognize Ouyang Luo Shuang's special makings even though she was chained. After a while, Shi Yang pondered and then pointed at her white forehead. A beam of starlight radiated. Before the primordial spirit lock could react, he had retreated his energy. Shi Yang's eyes were strange when he frowned and thought quietly. The holy, flawless aura from Ouyang Luo Shuang was somehow familiar to him. It felt like he knew someone else with the same aura. He pulled himself together to search through his brain. After a while, he became bewildered, his face astounded. He understood it. When he was on Desolate, he had entered the strange lake and visited the incipient extent of the God Clan's precursor where there were moons, suns, and stars with a holy aura that he had sometimes found on Hague when he used the light power Upanishad. Rubbing his chin and looking at Ouyang Luo Shuang, Shi Yang sank in his thoughts. Tracing back to the origins of the moon, sun, and star power of the three god sect, Shi Yang knew it was from the God Clan, which were the other derivatives of the light power Upanishad. Being the moon god of the three god sect for many years, Ouyang Luo Shuang had cultivated the moonlight power Upanishad. At the same time, she used to fuse with a cold, yin incipient extent on Grace Mainland. After she had entered the universe, her realm had become more exquisite. She would have new good encounters and understanding of her powers. As her power and realm had increased, her power Upanishad had the tendency to return to its original appearance. Shi Yang guessed that the holy aura she got now appeared as her realm had reached a specific height. Her power Upanishad had slowly returned to its original status, which reflected the power of the light Upanishad. Of course, it was just his personal assumption. It could be possible that Ouyang Luo Shuang had different encounters that led to the change of her power Upanishad and helped her approach the essence of the light power Upanishad. We're about to reach the fantasy star. After we get there, I'll find the primordial spirit lock's key for you. Don't worry. I'll free you. I won't let them imprison you forever, said Shiyang. Ouyang Luo Shuang looked at him quietly. He could see the reluctance in her eyes, as if she didn't want him to go to the fantasy star to get himself killed with her. Ban Yu looked at the fantasy star that was getting clearer in his sight, his face stern. The peripheral areas of the fantasy star had many fulgent white light rings. They were the energy rivers with terrifying barriers that the fantasy star used to prevent the battleships from approaching. The Thousand Fantasy sect seldom depended on material wealth. It was the principle that Ling Xiong had set up. Although the fantasy star was the main planet of the Thousand Fantasy sect, there weren't many battleships or war chariots patrolling around it. The Thousand Fantasy sect favored the fantasy animals living in the fantasy zone. They used them as their traffic vehicles. The fantasy butterfly was a popular vehicle that was famous for its swift and agile characteristics. Many fantasy butterflies were moving around those white light rings. Each fantasy butterfly was as big as a war chariot and carried the Thousand Fantasy sect's warriors. In the past, the transport ships had to wait by the light rings. The Thousand Fantasy sect's warriors rode their fantasy animals to transport the materials they had bought from Tsunami Chamber of Commerce. However, it was different today. The warriors of the Thousand Fantasy sect didn't hover by the area that they usually were near. As soon as they saw the merchant ships, they scattered and surrounded the ships. "Sir, the Thousand Fantasy sect is circling us. What should we do?" A warrior of Chamber of Commerce darkened his face, the flame of anger appearing in his eyes. Ban Yu also snorted. He wasn't wary of the others because Tsunami Chamber of Commerce had the foundation and confidence to deal with the Thousand Fantasy sect. "Keep moving forward. Just let them circle us. Even if they have more guts, they won't dare to attack us." He turned around to see as he knew that the fantasy butterflies of the Thousand Fantasy sect had come for the mysterious young man in the cabin. He knew that because he saw Xing Shan and Wei Yun riding the butterflies too. The warriors of Chamber of Commerce frowned and threw looks over their shoulders. They knew why the Thousand Fantasy sect came. They thought that no matter what kind of identity or echelon Shi Yang had, he should leave the ship quickly. If he wanted to come to the fantasy star, he should leave the ship and enter the planet quietly from another location. Because Tsunami Chamber of Commerce's ships had a fixed route and unloading location, it was going to be pretty simple for the others to find him. For example, if he wanted to leave now, it would be too difficult already. "I'm Captain Feng Hao of the Fantasy Butterfly Troop of the Thousand Fantasy sect. Friends from Chamber of Commerce, please stop your ship." Hao Feng's voice arose loudly. He looked at Ban Yu in the distance and nodded to greet him. Ban Yu frowned and snorted coldly. "We've not reached our destination yet. Keep moving forward." The warriors on the transport ships continued to move despite Hao Feng's request. Although the fantasy butterflies were hissing sharply, Tsunami Chamber of Commerce's ships forcefully thrust through their circle and kept moving forward to the fantasy star. They stopped when they reached the white light ring. This area was the place they usually anchored their ships. Hao Feng had forced them to stop earlier because he didn't want them to stay close to the fantasy star. Otherwise, when they created big commotions, they could alert the experts on the fantasy star, which would affect Hao Feng's promise to Xing Ying. Ban Yu didn't give him face. Hao Feng wore a cold and sinister face, but he didn't dare to attack Ban Yu. He continued to shout and make his butterflies maneuver and surround the 7 ships of Tsunami Chamber of Commerce once again. Then, he flew out of his butterfly and landed skillfully on Ban Yu's merchant ship. His line of sight fell directly on the closed cabin. At the same time, Xing Ying had brought Xing Shan and Wei Yun with about 10 ethereal god realm warriors of the Broken Hall to Ban Yu's ship. "I heard that you've violated the agreement. You brought a stranger on your ship to the fantasy star. Do you know what the consequences are?" Hao Feng sneered. Tsunami Chamber of Commerce's credit is what people have talked about the most in this vast universe. It's the reason why people trust you. You've proactively torn our agreement. I wonder how you will explain to the others. Xing Ying's phoenix eyes had a sinister light, her face caustic and mean. She had a cold and malicious aura of a serpent living in a dark and humid cave. Ban Yu was discontent with Shi Yang, but he also hated Hao Feng and Xing Ying. He snorted and then said, "Our Cold Iron City's manager has ordered this. I can't handle this situation. If you have doubts, go talk to your superior to talk to our city manager. I'm doing my job to bring him here." He didn't want to give them face. It seems that Tsunami Chamber of Commerce has become arrogant. You think you can force people to buy your products? I'm going to tell my dad. Let's see how your manager explains. Xing Ying's eyes were dark. Well, as you wish, Ban Yu shrugged. He didn't even want to see her. He turned to the closed cabin, pondered, and then said, "As per our city manager's request, I only bring you to this area. We're not going to get involved in your business later." As he said that, Hao Feng, Xing Ying, Xing Shan, and Wei Yun were surprised a lot. As they saw that Ban Yu was being bold, they thought that Ban Yu wanted to protect Shi Yang. Anyway, Ban Yu was part of Tsunami Chamber of Commerce's staff. If he wanted to protect Shi Yang and it was what the superiors of Tsunami Chamber of Commerce wanted to do, it was going to be a big headache for them. They didn't expect that after being bold, Ban Yu would deny his relationship with Shi Yang. This sudden change had surprised them a lot. They felt that it inexplicable as they couldn't figure out what kind of relationship was between Ban Yu and Shi Yang. "Hey friend, you still want to hide? It's time to meet up, isn't it?" Hao Feng was bewildered for a moment and then he reacted. Hao Feng could tell that if Ban Yu had proactively erased their relationship, this young man had no relationship to the Chamber of Commerce. Without Tsunami Chamber of Commerce's trouble, the area surrounding the Fantasy Star was Hao Feng's territory. What kind of game could Shi Yang play here? He could rub or pinch the other as much as he pleased then. Hao Feng became excited discreetly. He wanted to capture Shi Yang to interrogate him and hand him over to Xing Ying. After that, he could have another chance to enjoy Xing Ying's wild and passionate taste. Thinking about the marvelous romance awaiting him, Hao Feng's desire appeared in his eyes. He couldn't wait for more. "Well, so you guys are the ones that the Thousand Fantasy Sect, Broken Hall, and Heaven River Temple have sent here to welcome me?" Shi Yang's cold and bold voice came from the closed room. Then, the door opened. Shi Yang's brawny body like an imposing mountain appeared on the stone bed in the room. Xing Ying's and Hao Feng's eyes brightened. Xing Ying looked at Shi Yang while Hao Feng eyed Ouyang Luo Shuang. Their eyes sparkled with magical light as they were so amazed. In Xing Ying's eyes, Shi Yang with his hunky body, cold and tyrannical bearings was the best of men. He looked way manlier than any young and handsome man she used to sleep with. Her heart suddenly felt itchy and she couldn't hold it down. At the same time, Ouyang Luo Shuang without her veil and with her exquisite face, her holy, flawless aura had attracted Hao Feng deeply. This pair of adulterers had eyed Shi Yang and Ouyang Luo Shuang right after the door opened and they couldn't get their eyes off the other two. They had almost forgotten the reason why they came here. While they were still baffled, Shi Yang strode out of the room and said coldly, "Even if Ling Xiong, Caesar, and Lorraine didn't come to welcome me personally, they should let Gullion, Xing Ming, or Lena come here. Well, the Thousand Fantasy Sect, the Broken Hall, and the Heaven River Temple don't have the right manners. They let some juniors come to welcome me. I want to hear Ling Xiong, Caesar, and Lorraine's explanation then." Chapter 1282, Overbearing. Chapter 1282, Overbearing. Listening to him, Xing Ying and Hao Feng pulled themselves together, their eyes so strange. Ban Yu snorted and sneered inwardly. "Well, just continue to posture. Let's see how long you can pretend." Ouyang Luo Shuang sighed and forced a smile. Her bright eyes looked reluctant as she thought, "So you think you can scare everybody? You've deceived Xing Shong and Wei Yun once. Do you think you can trick them one more time?" The warriors of the Broken Hall and Thousand Fantasy Sect wore cold faces and looked at him, their murderous aura shooting into the air. "Who keeps the key of the primordial spirit lock?" Shi Yang walked out of the room, looking at Xing Shong and talking arrogantly. "She and I have a deep relationship. Give me the key." I'll talk to Caesar about this myself. Xing Shang's face grimaced. He couldn't hold it anymore and he shouted, "Shut up. Don't fight on my ship." Ban Yu intervened and frowned. "If you damage our ships, you have to compensate. If you want to fight, please choose another area. The Thousand Fantasy Sect, Broken Hall, and Heaven River Temple have invited me here. Is this how you treat the distinguished guest?" Shi Yang snorted and said coldly, "All right, it seems like I need to find your superiors on the Fantasy Star to talk about this." He extended one hand to grab Ouyang Luo Shuang's sleeve to avoid physical contact with her that would activate the primordial spirit lock. He held her sleeve and dragged her out of Ban Yu's merchant ship as if he didn't see the warriors of the Thousand Fantasy Sect and Broken Hall around watching him. He wanted to head to the Fantasy Star directly. Xing Shang and Wei Yun moved and stood in his way. At the same time, Xing Ying and Hao Feng had signaled the warriors of the Thousand Fantasy Sect and the Broken Hall to ride the fantasy butterflies to block his way. "Sir!" The warrior on Tsunami Chamber of Commerce's ship couldn't help but ask their captain. Ban Yu shook his head, implying that they shouldn't interfere with their business. "We're responsible for transporting the materials that the Thousand Fantasy Sect ordered. We shouldn't care about the other stuff. Just stand and watch them." His warriors stood silently, their heads stooped. The Thousand Fantasy Sect wanted to capture Shi Yang first and receive the materials from the transport ships later. Thus, Ban Yu's team didn't dare to leave. They had to wait until this event finished. Ban Yu and Tsunami Chamber of Commerce's warriors looked at Shi Yang, who was surrounded. They had to stay alert to see how the situation would develop. Shi Yang was still flying like a dumb fool who wasn't afraid of the power of the Thousand Fantasy Sect and the Broken Hall. Xing Shang smiled darkly. He opened his mouth and spurted out a blue lightning ball. This lightning ball was created from billions of lightning bolts. The sharp electrical beams sizzled with Xing Shang's pure soul consciousness. The lightning ball was massive with domineering power and it was aimed at Shi Yang's chest. "I want him alive." Xing Ying suddenly smiled, her lusty eyes watery and her mouth parting erotically. Xing Shang's face stiffened as he cursed his slutty niece under his breath. He had to change his attack midway. The massive lightning ball then turned into a thick mesh lightning net that stretched towards Shi Yang and attempted to capture him. He knew that his niece and his cousin Xing Ming had the same character. They were really into the stuff between a man and a woman. As he had made mistakes this time, he didn't dare to offend Xing Ying. He could only follow her order and fulfill her wish. He had to capture Shi Yang so his niece could have fun with this hunky man. Xing Shang felt so bitter and worried. At first, he had followed Xing Ming's order to kidnap Ouyang Luo Shuang, and right now, he had to serve Xing Ying and capture Shi Yang. It made the second sky of incipient God-realm expert, the #1 character in the Broken Hall like him, feel so resentful that he wanted to vomit blood. But he had to do that. "It's your Broken Hall who started to attack me first. Later on, when Caesar comes, don't blame me for having no mercy," Shi Yang suddenly sneered. Ban Yu looked further ahead and shook his head with a dark face. He thought that this man was about to die, but he was still talking boastfully. Did he really think that he could create an imaginary relationship with Caesar with some sentences to scare Xing Shang of the Broken Hall? He doesn't want to live anymore. Ouyang Luo Shuang had the same thought. She had soon recognized that Shi Yang had only first sky of incipient God realm cultivation base, one level lower than Xing Shang. She also knew that Xing Shang wasn't weak. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been captured. Thus, she became more desperate as she thought that Shi Yang had just been posturing. While the people here were cold and indifferent and waiting to see Shi Yang embarrass himself, Shi Yang took action. He rose one arm and grabbed Xing Shang's neck despite the space and distance between them, as if he didn't see the lightning net snatching over him. The strange situation happened abruptly. It was obvious that his arm was too far away from Xing Shang. However, as soon as he rose his arm, the space between him and Xing Shang shortened instantly. After just a blink of an eye, people found that it looked like Xing Shang was too puzzled. It seemed like he proactively craned his neck so Shi Yang could grab him. It was so bizarre. Layers of space energy waves emerged at Shi Yang's fingertips that helped him close the distance and grip Xing Shang's neck before his lightning net reached Shi Yang. Quickly, Xing Ying's face reddened, his eyes bulging and his face extremely panic-stricken. The lightning net that was about to snatch over him was erased by Xingshong himself when Shi Yang's eye met his. In that short moment, the vicious Xingshong, the second sky of incipient Godrealm, had his neck grabbed by a young man that had forced him to cancel his attack. Ban Yu, Xing Ying, Hao Feng, and Ouyang Luo Shuang were amazed. They thought that it was so unreal. It was as if they saw a ghost in daylight. The warriors of Tsunami Chamber of Commerce rubbed their eyes instinctively. They thought that they were dizzy. However, the scene didn't change afterward. Shi Yang was grabbing Xingshong by his neck. Xingshong looked so frightened as he tried to pull Shi Yang's hand to get rid of his strangler. But he couldn't do that. Xingshong's legs were wiggling like a pig lifted to the air, waiting to be slaughtered. He looked so helter-skelter. He was so embarrassed. However, Xingshong didn't have any extra bit of effort to think about his reputation. He was filled with fear. Because all of his powers, including the chi of his blood body, his soul energy, and his god power, were being drained little by little from the moment Shi Yang had grabbed his neck. It was some sort of unrecoverable outflow. He understood clearly and fear crept over him. This feeling of his energy being drained weakened him slowly and made him edgy. He was about to collapse. He knew how strenuous it was for him to reach his realm and cultivation base today. He had let others humiliate him to receive the precious cultivating materials from Xing Ming. He had to kidnap beautiful women for Xing Ming. He had even acted servilely to his niece, Xing Ying. To be strong, he had to struggle a lot. He was so wary of the time without power. He knew that once his realm was reduced, he wouldn't be able to keep the position in the broken hall, even if Xing Ming took care of him. He was so afraid. He was afraid that this vision would happen. With power, he had taken steps to come to this day. He understood better than anyone else that without the intimidating power to survive, he was nothing. You keep the key of the primordial spirit lock? Shi Yang gazed at Xingshong and Asjed indifferently as if he didn't recognize Xingshong's fear or the shock on the others' faces. Xingshong choked painfully, his face so red that it looked like it could bleed in any minute. He shook his head and struggled continuously. He had tried to let his soul alter fly out of his body. However, as soon as his soul moved, it was struck. Countless flows of sinister, desperate souls invaded his soul instantaneously. He was so scared as if he was about to be buried. He hastened to stop his deed. So you keep it? Shi Yang was surprised. He turned to ask Wei Yun. Wei Yun shook his head, his face panic-stricken. No, I don't have it. Really, I don't have it. Buddy, you dare to attack the others in our 1,000 fantasy sects territory. You didn't care about our 1,000 fantasy sects' reputation. Don't blame us for not showing mercy. While Hao Feng was talking, he retreated and gave the signal to an incipient god realm of the 1,000 fantasy sect on his side. The man became stern as he said, "Your space power Upanishad is really excellent. Little friend, you must be the mysterious expert of Tsunami Chamber of Commerce. Only the strong forces like Tsunami Chamber of Commerce could have elite experts with space power Upanishad. Please give the 1,000 fantasy sect face once. Release Xingshong. Our 1,000 fantasy sect will solve this seriously. Sir, is he one of us?" The warriors of Tsunami Chamber of Commerce couldn't help but look at Ban Yu. Ban Yu frowned, his face astounded. He wasn't so sure about this. In this vast sea of stars, most of the warriors with profound space power Upanishad had been recruited by Tsunami Chamber of Commerce. Although Shi Yang didn't admit that he was a member of Chamber of Commerce, come to think about it, Ban Yu had received the order from Cold Iron City's manager to deliver Shi Yang to the Fantasy Star. Also, he was pretty young with a high attainment of space power Upanishad. These signs showed that Shi Yang could become a real member of the Chamber of Commerce. Ban Yu tried to know Shi Yang's real identity. All of a sudden, he remembered one expert and his face changed immediately. "Are you Sir De Carlos' son?" Ban Yu suddenly shouted. He was startled and he spoke resolutely. "Oh right. Sir De Carlos is the important consecrator of the Chamber of Commerce. He has built so many marvelous space teleport formations. He said that he wanted to train his children, so he has left the position for several years recently. Is it true that he's done his best to train you? While he was talking about De Carlos, his face was so respectful as he thought it was true. De Carlos was a special expert in Tsunami Chamber of Commerce that even the president had to respect him a lot. In the cosmos, his reputation was well spread. He was best known as the expert with the first space power Upanishad. De Carlos had built many complex teleport formations on the Tsunami Star. Ban Yu thought that if Shi Yang was one of De Carlos' children, he wouldn't need to be afraid of the Thousand Fantasy Sect or the Broken Hall. It was because De Carlos had befriended with Bloodthirsty. At the same time, De Carlos had helped Imperial Dark Tribe and Heavenly Monster Tribe to build the space teleport formations. He was a sage with supernatural powers and an extraordinary position in this vast universe. Hearing Ban Yu shout, Hao Feng and the incipient God Realm expert of the Thousand Fantasy Sect together with Xing Ying and her Broken Hall's warriors had to change their visages. When they looked at Shi Yang once again, their faces were strange, as if they were really afraid of De Carlos. They felt as if their hands were tied. Sir De Carlos is the important consecrator of our Chamber of Commerce. Although he doesn't admit that he's our member, we always consider him as one of us. Of course, his family members are our Tsunami Chamber of Commerce's members too. You guys, you know what to do now, right? Ban Yu suddenly hissed. Tsunami Chamber of Commerce's warriors shouted to reply to him. They rode the war chariots, flew out, and prepared to engage in this battle. Chapter 1283, My Woman. Chapter 1283, My Woman. The participation of Tsunami Chamber of Commerce's warriors had troubled the warriors of the Thousand Fantasy Sect and the Broken Hall more. They felt that their hands tied upon seeing Shi Yang keeping Xing Shong as the hostage. Ban Yu had confirmed that Shi Yang was the descendant of De Carlos, which had made his identity heavier. De Carlos had a good relationship with Bloodthirsty, Dark Imperial Tribe, and Heavenly Monster Tribe. It meant that the Thousand Fantasy Sect and the Broken Hall couldn't offend him. Xing Shong was captured. What should they do? Xing Ying and Hao Feng felt terrible headaches. Shi Yang was so surprised. He had never heard about the expert called De Carlos. He was bewildered when Ban Yu sounded so sure that he was De Carlos' descendant. However, he didn't try to make it clear. He maintained his grip on Xing Shong and spoke coldly, Give me the key of the primordial spirit lock if you want him back. As Ouyang Luo Shuang's sleeve was chained with a tender starlight, she stood upright by Shi Yang. Although she couldn't move or talk, her pure, elegant makings were so attractive. Her clear eyes were so mesmerizing that they rippled with beautiful lights. She was also frightened. In the past years, she had been wandering around the vast universe alone. She had a better knowledge. She knew the name of this first consecrator of Tsunami Chamber of Commerce, De Carlos. She knew that he was a master of space power Upanishad. It could be said that his attainment in understanding space power Upanishad was the best in this cosmos. Shi Yang was De Carlos' child. Ouyang Luo Shuang was astounded, but she was more skeptical because she knew that Shi Yang was from Grace Mainland, and when she was in their homeland, she had never heard about the name De Carlos. She checked his expression and found that he was also surprised. Ouyang Luo Shuang understood it immediately. Ban Yu had misunderstood and Shi Yang was just posturing. She didn't know whether to cry or smile. However, hope rose in her heart. She knew the truth, but the Thousand Fantasy Sect and the Broken Hall didn't. Neither did Ban Yu. With De Carlos' reputation and Xing Shong under hostage, she might have a chance to be rescued. We don't have the key to the primordial spirit lock. We can't give it to you. Xing Ying was struck. She pondered and then said mildly, How about this? We're going to the Fantasy Star first. I will find my father to get the key and give it to you. Can you give me more time? Shi Yang shrugged and spoke casually, Maybe. Then, he used the star energy to bring Ouyang Luo Shuang with him while his other hand still held onto Xing Shong. He began to fly towards the Fantasy Star's territory. Currently, Xing Shong's face was grimaced and as purple as pig liver. He continuously blinked at Xing Ying in the hope that Xing Ying would help him or rescue him. Xing Ying acted as if she didn't see his signals. Since Ban Yu had confirmed Shi Yang's identity as the later generation of Decarlos, Hao Feng and the Thousand Fantasy Sect's warriors didn't dare to act rashly. They kept silent and indifferent. He's the descendant of an important consecrator in our Chamber of Commerce. We shouldn't enter the Fantasy Star. But I'm afraid it will be an exception this time. After we make it clear, we will leave. Ban Yu sounded bold. He signaled the warriors of Tsunami Chamber of Commerce on the war chariots to follow Shi Yang to the Fantasy Star. Wait a minute. It's an important matter. I have to report it first. The incipient God Realm expert of the Thousand Fantasy Sect accompanying Hao Feng finally recognized that something was wrong. He didn't want to let Hao Feng act on his own. He had to take it seriously as it was his responsibility to patrol the outer layer of the Fantasy Star. Sure, Ban Yu nodded. Everybody turned to Shi Yang. Shi Yang grinned and then turned his grin into a strange, bright smile. You'd better report it to Ling Xiong directly. Otherwise, it will be hard to solve then. The expert changed his face in fear. He found that it had become even more strange. Instinctively, he thought that something was so wrong. Shi Yang was too calm. When the Thousand Fantasy Sect and Broken Hall surrounded him and threatened him, he didn't look scared or panicked at all. His calmness was odd to them. From their experiences, this kind of performance belonged to two kinds of people, the pathetic and dumb, and those with strong background. This expert could see that Shi Yang wasn't stupid at all. Thus, there was only one possibility now. He wasn't afraid of anyone from the Thousand Fantasy Sect or the Broken Hall. This conclusion had scared the expert. He originally thought that he should contact Hao Feng's superior. But now, he changed his mind. He decided to report directly to the sect master. Please wait up here. His attitude became more respectful. He bent his body slightly and then turned around to get some distance from Shi Yang before using his secret method of contacting Ling Xiong. Hao Feng, Xing Ying, and Ban Yu looked shocked as they couldn't comprehend what was happening. Especially Hao Feng. He knew this expert held a high position in the Thousand Fantasy Sect. Unless he was meeting his peers like Lena and Xing Ming, he wasn't so cautious or respectful. As he treated Shi Yang this way, it spoke up the fact that he had considered Shi Yang's position like Lena or Xing Ming. Hao Feng was scared. He regretted his rash acts as he knew he had stepped on needles this time. Xing Ying's beautiful face was uncertain. She coldly snarled and glared at Wei Yun. You guys have done good things this time. Ban Yu looked relaxed and waited. When he looked at Shi Yang, he smiled. Hao Feng, Xing Ying, and Ban Yu assumed that Shi Yang was the later generation of Decarlos as they thought that it was the reason why he wasn't afraid of the Thousand Fantasy Sect, Broken Hall, and Heaven River Temple. He wasn't afraid of their punishment. Right when they were chasing their own thoughts, the incipient God Realm expert who had contacted Ling Xiong suddenly said something that made them completely perplexed. The man turned around, his face frightened. Master has ordered us to wait here. He will come with Master Caesar and Master Lorraine. Even the expert himself was shocked. He looked at Shi Yang as if he was something really incredible. Ban Yu, Hao Feng, Xing Ying, and Wei Yun gawked as they couldn't catch up with the situation. At their positions, Ling Xiong, Caesar, and Lorraine didn't need to welcome Shi Yang, Decarlos' children, or even Decarlos himself. Moreover, the three of them came here together. In this vast sea of stars, who was qualified to make the three of them welcome him personally? The God Clan's chief. The matriarch of Imperial Dark Tribe? Xing Ying and Wei Yun paled. They were restlessly anxious. Hao Feng's face was sour as he regretted his actions so much. Ouyang Luo Shuang thought she was dreaming. She looked at Shi Yang, her heart beating frantically. She found that she had underestimated Shi Yang and his mysteries. Ban Yu was puzzled. He rubbed his chin, his face strange. He didn't know the reason why, either. He understood that even if Tsunami Chamber of Commerce's president came here, he wouldn't have such a welcoming delegation. While they were still baffled, Ling Xiong, Caesar, and Lorraine came together. Gullion, Xing Ming, and Lena, the managers with real powers of the Thousand Fantasy Sect, Broken Hall, and Heaven River Temple also accompanied them. Ha ha ha. As soon as Ling Xiong arrived, he laughed cheerily, his voice filled with joy. You do give me face. As soon as you've enthroned, you come to visit my fantasy star. It's our honor. However, before you arrived, you didn't notify us of the exact time. That's why we couldn't arrange earlier to welcome you properly. We feel embarrassed, though. Ling Xiong's team had discussed and decided to give Shi Yang face to eliminate his guard and help them smoothen everything. Thus, they all came to give him a good impression to fulfill what they had discussed. In their eyes, Shi Yang was very young, so if they treated him well and gave him the respect he deserved, they could persuade him. Ban Yu, Hao Feng, Xing Ying, Wei Yun, and Ouyang Luo Shuang, of course, didn't know Ling Xiong's plan. They didn't know that they came here personally with some other purpose. Thus, all the warriors of the Thousand Fantasy Sect, Broken Hall, and Thousand Fantasy Sect outside the Fantasy Star became dead silent after they heard Ling Xiong's voice. They all gazed at Shi Yang now. They were all dumbfounded. They had a big question in their heads that filled their minds and occupied the room of their other thoughts. Who was this man? Hum. Xing Shong was still struggling. It was his limitation. He tried to wiggle and make noise to attract people's attention. Who is this? Caesar frowned, his voice low-pitched. A subordinate of my hall. Why did he offend you, sir? Shi Yang threw a look at Ban Yu and asked, You explain it to him. Ban Yu was bewildered. He was still sinking in this big suspicion. As Caesar and Shi Yang were watching him, he bent slightly and narrated the situation. Caesar snorted and glanced at Xing Ming standing behind him, his eyes so sharp. Xing Ming lowered his head, sweat beading his forehead. He didn't even dare to retort. Although Caesar had almost ignored the matters of the Broken Hall, Xing Ming knew how terrifying Caesar was. At the Immortal Realm and with a cultivation base, it would be a piece of cake if Caesar wanted to kill him. Xing Ming had depended on Caesar's name to do many things. Well, I don't think our Broken Hall needs your permission to capture 1 or 2 people, sir. If she's your friend, it's our mistake. But I heard from Ban Yu that you guys, Caesar frowned. He hadn't finished. His face was still stretched. Caesar, the warrior who was obsessed with martial arts, was also famous for his bold and cold characteristics, but now he looked so surprised. Many warriors surrounding were shocked, their faces weird. Because at this moment, Shi Yang suddenly released Xing Ying and pulled Ouyang Luo Shuang, embracing her perfect body. He then placed a kiss on her succulent lips. His kiss was rude and strong that everyone could see clearly. After that, he didn't care about the anger and embarrassment in Ouyang Luo Shuang's eyes. He just nodded to Caesar and said, She's my woman. His voice was tyrannical and overbearing. He had surprised many women around. They looked dizzy and passionate because of him. Xing Ying felt her body get very hot. Even Lena and Lorraine were baffled. They blushed, their eyes strange. All right, it's our Broken Hall's mistake. My apologies. I'm sorry for not controlling my subordinates well. I hope they didn't trouble you too much, sir. Caesar was also an overlord of a big force, but he resolutely admitted the mistake. Then, he looked at Xing Ming brutally and snorted, Do you need me to teach you what to do? Chapter 1284, Who is he after all? Chapter 1284, Who is he after all? No need, sir. Xing Ming stooped, bending and handing the key of the primordial spirit lock. He clasped his hand and spoke to Shi Yang sincerely. I didn't know that this lady is your woman. Please show mercy. My cousin was wrong this time. We will give you a proper explanation. He looked at Xing Shong, pondered, and then talked, chop off one hand. Xing Shong paled, his mouth twitching. He wanted to cry but he couldn't. Xing Ming's eyes were so cold and sinister as he at him. Xing Shong shivered and gritted his teeth. He then took out a sharp knife and chopped off his left arm. The pain from the cut made him crouch. Sir, is it okay now? Xing Ming looked at Shi Yang. All of them looked at Shi Yang. Ban Yu, Hao Feng, and Xing Ying discolored. Seeing Xing Shong cut his arm, they felt like it was a sharp saber cutting their bodies. They could even feel the pain and their minds were so tense. Hold on. I need to make it clear. Shi Yang didn't change his visage as if he didn't mind that Xingshong chopped off his arm. He received the key and used the method Ban Yu had told him to unlock the primordial spirit lock. The primordial spirit lock had a notch, which was the keyhole. Shi Yang inserted the key and sent a beam of his god power. After a cracking sound, the primordial spirit lock was unchained and the wisp of soul confined inside the chain returned into Ouyang Luo Shuang's head as an invisible snake, merging with her host soul. After she was unchained, the first thing Ouyang Luo Shuang did was throw Shi Yang a resentful glare. Then, she still stood by him, her face friendly to him. She knew that it was Shi Yang's words that said that she was his woman who had returned her freedom to her and cut off Xingshong's one arm. If she wanted to maintain her freedom one more time, she had to continue playing her role. Thus, she could only stick to Shi Yang. Her exquisite face became shy although she was cursing Shi Yang under her breath. He had seized the chance to bully her, but she could only go with his flow. "Little Shuang, what do you think?" Shi Yang said gently. After Shi Yang said that, he could feel Ouyang Luo Shuang's body that was sticking to his side stiffen. Shi Yang sneered inwardly, but his face was still serious and his voice was tender. "Little Shuang, if it's not enough, it's okay to cut his other arm." He threw a glance to Xingshong. Xingshong felt a chill run down his spine. Even his veins were shivering. Ouyang Luo Shuang looked at Xingshong then Xingming, her eyes cold. She talked indifferently. "You don't need to be bothered with that. I can move now, but I can't contact my teacher. He will take revenge for me." Shi Yang was bewildered. Caesar's team was also baffled. Then they laughed casually as if they didn't mind Ouyang Luo Shuang's words much. "Sir, please go to the Fantasy Star." Ling Xiong smiled and nodded to the incipient God Realm expert who had reported to him on the event as he thought they were done here. "Hao Feng isn't suitable to the Fantasy Butterfly Troop's captain. You go and talk to his seniors." The other nodded and regarded him respectfully. From a distance, Hao Feng's face turned ash-brown. Now, he had only reluctant despair in his eyes. He knew what Ling Xiong had said was similar to a death sentence to him. He could never rise again in the Thousand Fantasy sect. He looked at Shi Yang leaving, his heart filled with regret and bitter thoughts. He knew that he could never take revenge against Shi Yang. This guy was a character that their sect master had to come and welcome personally. Hao Feng and his family could only stand with their heads lowered. If they dared to protest, they were going to be erased from the Thousand Fantasy sect. He could only swallow this bitter fruit and forget this event. Different from Hao Feng, Xing Ying's eyes were bright as she was so obsessed with Shi Yang. Her lusty desire churned in her heart. In her eyes, Shi Yang was cold and haughty, which was the traits of the most perfect man in this world. If she could have one night with this sort of man, even if she had to die, it would be worth it. She had put Hao Feng, the one who had one hot night with her, out of her mind already. She didn't even look at Hao Feng in his distress. She didn't give him a word to console him. She directly walked away and swung her hips from side to side. She walked to Xingming, her father, without giving the other a glance. To her, Hao Feng was now just someone in the past. "I know from Tsunami Chamber of Commerce's president that you would come here. That's why Caesar and Lorraine are here to wait for you. I'm so sorry you have to experience some little trouble." Along the way, Ling Xiong smiled, deliberately led ahead, giving his apology to Shi Yang. Caesar, Lorraine, and Lena moved by him. This group of people crossed the white light ring outside the Fantasy Star and landed directly on the Fantasy Star's land. Xingming, Gullion, and Ban Yu stayed behind. They didn't follow them. "Ban Yu, you guys have a rough trip this time. Stay and rest on our Fantasy Star. I will send someone to receive the materials on the ships. You guys come here with us." Gullion invited Tsunami Chamber of Commerce's staff after she had received Ling Xiong's secret signal. As Ban Yu was so curious about Shi Yang's identity, Gullion's invitation suited him well. He agreed immediately. "Oh, then I have to bother you. The items you ordered are on the ships. Just like many previous times, please check and receive them." "Ban. Okay, I'll handle it." Gullion smiled, taking Ban Yu and some High Realm warriors of Chamber of Commerce to follow Ling Xiong, Shi Yang, and Ouyang Luo Shuang to the Fantasy Star. Hao Feng kept his head low and said nothing. He rode the fantasy butterfly and left, his shadow lonely. Xing Ying didn't notice him leaving. She pretended to know nothing and said to Xing Shong, "Uncle, don't blame my father. It's the hall master's order. We couldn't do anything. You should rest well. After this thing is settled, I'm sure I can heal your limb. You've been troubled this time. I will remember this. I won't mistreat you." Xing Ming hadn't left yet to comfort Xing Shong. He used the sincere words to ensure he would recover Xing Shong's cut limb to prevent the man from keeping a grudge against him. Xing Ming didn't have power as intimidating as Caesar's. He knew himself well. He understood that if he wanted to keep his position in the broken hall, he had to have strong subordinates. To achieve what he had today, it was all because of his excellent interpersonal skills. "I just want to know who he is." Xing Shong's wound had stopped bleeding. He quivered, his face pale. Hearing him, Xing Ying, Wei Yun, and the other Broken Hall's warriors gathered their spirits and looked at Xing Ming curiously. It was the biggest doubt in their hearts. Who was Shi Yang after all? He's the new master of the bloodthirsty force. He got the Genesis fruit. If nothing unexpected happens, he will become the real overlord of this cosmos in the next 10,000 years. Xing Ming sighed and then comforted Xing Shong, "It's our bad luck this time. But it's good that he doesn't care about it anymore. You'll be all right. Right. Because he just enthroned, our master will give him face. It's because if he can survive and inherit the power of that man, he will influence people in a short time." Xing Ying, Xing Shong, and Wei Yun were frightened, their faces pale. No wonder, Xing Shong sounded sad. Bloodthirsty force was the force that used to be stronger than the God clan. Their brutal name was heard in every corner of the world. After 10,000 years, since Shi Yang got the Genesis fruit, the rumor that the bloodthirsty force was about to rise again had spread out in this entire universe. All the forces in the vast sea of stars had thought that only the bloodthirsty force could stand shoulder by shoulder with the God clan. They were going to replace the God clan and become the main characters of the cosmos in the coming 10,000 years. They had never thought that they would be in bad luck after they had provoked the future overlord of the universe. Xing Shong and Wei Yun could only accept their misfortune. Xing Ying had starlight sparkle in her eyes. Shi Yang was very attractive to her. And now, because of his echelon and position, he was even hotter to her. She had to grab every chance she had to get this man. She must have him at any cost. She had made up her mind. Outside the fantasy zone. It was a chaotic, broken space with 6 massive meteorites that created strange energy fields like 6 rivers congregated. A beautiful star nucleus like the moonlight zoomed over from a far distance, falling toward the 6 meteorites. A laser-looking man was sitting on that nucleus and drinking fragrant wine and sparkling fruits. He slowly landed. This man had narrow, phoenix eyes, and the contours on his face were so tender and soft like feminine characteristics. His makings were like supple water, which was really strange. The man wore a loose robe that could be found anywhere. However, his sleeves were really wide as if he kept the endless supernatural power in there. The moon nucleus he was riding was the essence of the bright moon from a lunar star he had recently refined. It was the tool he had prepared for his student to cultivate. This area was the place he and his student had agreed to meet up. After he had landed, the laser looking on his face disappeared. The holy light shot out from his eyes and illuminated the place. It then projected the situation that had happened here. Slowly, his face became sinister. He snorted, "Those people from the broken hall dared to force my student. They should know how high this sky is." Then, he touched the moon nucleus. Billions of moonlight beams shot out like silver needles that were extremely sharp. Puff, puff. In just a blink of an eye, the 6 meteorites exploded. Their fragments bombarded the fantasy zone massively. They created a fierce tornado twirling around the fantasy zone. Many warriors who of the 1,000 fantasy sect operating around the fantasy zone were in danger. The man's flame of rage had troubled them a lot. Many ethereal god realm experts were killed violently. The tornado was created inside the fantasy zone. It attacked around and then headed to the fantasy star. Eventually, the white light rings protecting the fantasy star had stopped them. And that man was riding the moon nucleus, maliciously charged around violently. He had killed a lot of fantasy animals in his way. As easily as if he was breaking dry trees, he stormed straight to the host star of the Thousand Fantasy sect. In the Blood Sea Forbidden Land. A flow of Ming Hao's soul stormed into Frederick's palace on the Corpse Chi Island. Frederick and Xian He were discussing important matters. Seeing Ming Hao's soul coming, they didn't look happy. Ming Hao's floating soul moved around and said sternly, "Something has changed. I received the news that Carefree has arrived at the Fantasy Star." Listening to him, Xian He and Frederick discolored. They jolted up from their seats. Xian He and Frederick knew the name Carefree well. Knowing that he was on the Fantasy Star, they changed their countenances and immediately began to prepare their arrangement. Chapter 1285, An Ambiguous Relationship. Chapter 1285, An Ambiguous Relationship. The islet in the middle of the lake on the Fantasy Star. Ling Xiong brought Shi Yang to the islet while smiling. "I've been staying here and cultivating ascetically for years. I've sent my love to the beauty of nature. I've almost forgotten the truth of power." Caesar, Lorraine, and Lena paid attention to see how Shi Yang would reply. In this vast universe, the deep meanings of power Upanishads appear everywhere. If you want it very much, you can see it. A stupid person can't locate a gold mine even if he's sitting on it. Shi Yang stood in between the bamboo pavilions. While taking a deep breath, his face was strange. This place is the soul of the Fantasy Star, the most marvelous place of the planet. It's really incredible. Where is it incredible? Ling Xiong tried to test him. Everywhere. Shi Yang looked around. The mountains, the bamboo pavilions, the fish and shrimps over there. I can't tell if they are real or not. Ling Xiong, Caesar, and Lorraine exchanged looks. They nodded discreetly. This place was the soul of the Fantasy Star. It was also the reason why the Fantasy Star had the word fantasy in its name. Even the strange conditions that had created the fantasy zone was related to this place. The beautiful and natural scenery here was real, but it could change at any moment. It was so inexplicable. The mountains, rivers, and spirit animals in this area should be the things from your incipient extent. Their existences depend on your thoughts. At the same time, this place has layers of spaces. They aren't your incipient extent, but they cross your incipient extent, and your incipient extent is just a layer of space among those spaces. Right. Shi Yang was shaken all of a sudden. He turned to ask Ling Xiong, his face amazed. Hearing him, Ling Xiong's team was very surprised. Shi Yang could recognize that this place was the soul of the planet and the scenery here wasn't real. Coming to this conclusion was extraordinary. They didn't think that he could even tell that the surroundings were unreal and from Ling Xiong's incipient extent. Closing his eyes to sense for a while, he told them that Ling Xiong's incipient extent was one layer of the layers of space here. It wasn't something that other experts could discover. When Lena and Xingming came here, they could only figure out the first thing. They weren't able to find the second discovery that Shi Yang had just done. You didn't fail your new position as the master. With only the incipient god realm, you can see a lot of things. Caesar nodded and sincerely complimented him. Your eyes are keen, indeed. It seems like the god clan will receive a lot of trouble this time. Lorraine smiled naturally. Ouyang Luo Shuang stood by Shi Yang. She just walked close to him and said nothing. At this moment, moonlight gushed out of her bright eyes and fell to her feet. A magical transformation appeared. The moonlight from her eyes was like a strong acid that began to erode the tranquil mountains and lakes, changing this world rapidly. The world that was created with layers of illusions was washed under the moonlight from her eyes. Shortly after, the real world appeared in their sights. Now, they were standing in the middle of many mountain ranges and massive ancient trees in front of grand palaces. Those palaces were built out of large rocks. They looked thick, heavy, and simple even though they gave people a majestic impression, making them respectful and subdued. This was the real scene. The moonlight in her eyes had torn the illusions and revealed the reality. Ling Xiong, Caesar, and Lorraine wore odd faces and studied Ouyang Luo Shuang as if they had found something really marvelous. Little girl, who is your teacher? Lorraine suddenly remembered what Ouyang Luo Shuang had said. Her teacher would come to take revenge for her. At that time, Lorraine didn't mind it. But now, she had a vague insecure feeling. The magical moonlight Ouyang Luo Shuang had released gave her a familiar feeling. She thought she had seen it before, but the memory of the one who had shown this ability was a long time ago, so it had faded. If she wasn't wrong, Ouyang Luo Shuang's teacher was a domineering and intimidating expert. He could be from the same generation as Lorraine's teacher. Ling Xiong and Caesar were bewildered. They looked contemplating as they gazed at Ouyang Luo Shuang. They could sense a magical and holy aura from Ouyang Luo Shuang and her power. They also felt familiar with that aura. However, for the time being, they couldn't remember. You two had encountered many unpleasant events along the way. Please rest today. We will discuss important matters tomorrow. Ling Xiong hadn't confirmed Ouyang Luo Shuang's identity, so he had to make more time to discuss it with Caesar and Lorraine. He needed to have the right attitude on this matter. Shi Yang thought that it wasn't a big deal, so he said, "It's good then. Little Ling, you should come and arrange the accommodations for our distinguished guests." Ling Xiong smiled and made his voices pitch higher intentionally. Gulling flew out from the thick forest behind them. Her eyes were bright and lively. She didn't look happy, though. You guys follow me. Little Ling is my adopted daughter. Her father was my sworn brother. Unfortunately, he had passed away when he was still young, Ling Xiong explained, his eyes having a sad gleam. Shi Yang gave a slight nod. Gulling wore a cold face, snorted, and led the way. She walked directly to a spacious palace. Shi Yang threw a glance at Ouyang Luo Shuang. Ouyang looked calm and relaxed. She came near him and walked with him behind Gulling. What do you think about him? Ling Xiong turned around and asked when he saw Shi Yang and Ouyang Luo Shuang leaving, his eyes absent-minded. Extraordinary and keen eyes. Although his realm is still low right now, he will thrive quickly with the supernatural power of Bloodthirsty, answered Lorraine. Not that simple. With Bloodthirsty's terrifying power Upanishad, he doesn't need to worry about collecting power. However, he still needs to take steps to understand his realm. Lena shook her head. I'm at peak of incipient god realm, just a step away from the immortal realm. However, this step has troubled me for 2,000 years. Lacking the realm's understanding will hold back the realm even if I have enough pure power to break through. Caesar, what do you think? Asked Ling Xiong. He defeated Harson and Haig. That proves his innate talents. He is stronger than the other two. In addition to Bloodthirsty's special power Upanishads, I think they make his future extraordinarily bright, said Caesar. I agree with Caesar. If this kid can survive, he will be an intimidating character, Ling Xiong nodded. Did you feel a familiar aura from that lady? Lorraine suddenly asked. It's also my concern, said Ling Xiong, his face stern. I know I used to feel it from someone. But I can't tell who it is now. Thus, I let them rest first. You guys should pay attention. Yeah, I also felt familiar. It seems like someone had told me before, said Caesar. They were suspicious, frowning and thinking. On the other side, Gulling with her ugly facial expression guided Shi Yang and Ouyang Luo Shuang to a palace. Her small face was so cold when she said, "This place is where our distinguished guests are treated. Please come in. If you need something, you can call the servants." Then, Gulling wore a hateful face and cursed men under her breath. She left with a snort. She and Cecilia had a good friendship. Because of Shi Yang, Lena had confined Cecilia. And now, Shi Yang came from the fantasy zone with a strange lady and had even stated that she was his woman. Gulling thought it was so unfair to Cecilia, so she didn't give him her good face. Wait a minute, I saw you with Cecilia last time. She didn't come here with her teacher Lena? Shi Yang called her and asked. Why did you ask about Cecilia? You found happiness again. Why do you need to concern yourself your old one? Men are so unfaithful. Gulling's eyes shifted between Ouyang Luo Shuang and Shi Yang, mocking. Is Cecilia here or not? Shi Yang frowned. I don't know. Gulling snorted and turned away immediately, her face cold. It has been so many years and you're still loose. No matter where you are, you never lack beauties to accompany you. You can't change your stripes even if someone beats you to death. Ouyang Luo Shuang's cold and clear voice arose after Gulling had left. Her sole consciousness checked around and found no one near them. Thus, she didn't want to stay near Shi Yang anymore. She proactively distanced herself from him, her face cold but bright. Shi Yang was standing by the door and looking at the ancient architecture of the palace. Hearing her voice, he turned around, his eyes scanning her body as he said, "So, are you one of the women on my side?" "Well, we hugged and kissed." "You're one of them, anyway, eh?" He snapped back because of Ouyang Luo Shuang's mocking attitude. Ouyang Luo Shuang's jade-like face blushed as she gritted her teeth. "Bastard. No matter what you say, some things can't be changed. Moreover, in this fantasy star, you have to admit that you're my woman," said Shi Yang with a shrug. "Wait until my teacher comes. We will make it clear. That little girl won't hate you anymore." Ouyang Luo Shuang took a deep breath and then resumed her normal countenance. She had trained her disposition better than anyone else. "I'm very curious. Who's your teacher?" Shi Yang squinted. The aura on Ouyang Luo Shuang's body was similar to the God Clan's expert's aura that he knew. He had been skeptical about this, but he didn't have any evidence. He was curious when Ouyang Luo Shuang mentioned her teacher. And now, she did it again, so Shi Yang took the chance to ask her. "Who is he?" Ouyang Luo Shuang looked bewildered. She hesitated for a while and then said, "I don't know his profile. But his realm and cultivation base are profound. He got something to do on the fantasy star, so he asked me to wait outside. While waiting for him, I was found and captured." Pausing for a while, Ouyang Luo Shuang's bright eyes became tender as he muttered, "Still, I need to thank you. I didn't think that a cold person like you would rescue me." Shi Yang rubbed his nose. I used to not want to save you. But I remembered you that year and I thought that if a guy like Xingming harassed you, even God wouldn't be able to stand it." "Me that year?" Ouyang Luo Shuang sounded surprised. Shi Yang nodded, his eyes strange when he recalled his memory. "That year, my realm was so low. When you broke the meteorite in Sky Meteor City and got out, you were like the mood god who came to this world. You were so pure and beautiful. At that time, I thought that a woman like you should appear only in men's dreams. You shouldn't be real." That year, Shi Yang was like a small ant, while Ouyang Luo Shuang was like the moon goddess at the sky realm. There was a deep abyss between them that he could never cross. Chapter 1286, Profound Comprehension. Chapter 1286, Profound Comprehension. The palace that Thousand Fantasy Sect had lodged them was spacious and luxurious with special cultivating chambers and training yards. This palace had 7 floors with 100 rooms, each floor was around 100 meters high. This palace was large enough to keep several hundred people. Currently, only Shi Yang and Ouyang Luo Shuang stayed here and occupied many balconies and windows. At night, the sky above this planet had 3 dreamy moons that formed a shape. Those moons were reflections of the 3 moons that were very far from them. They weren't the real moons here, but they could still illuminate the fantasy star. The night fell. Shi Yang and Ouyang Luo Shuang were standing on a stone platform and watching the beautiful sea of stars out there. They thought this scenery was so marvelous that nothing could compare to it. They were the warriors from Grace Mainland. After many years and billions of miles away, they met up on this planet. And now, they were beholding the beauty of the sky and recalling memories in the past. "That year, after I got out of the meteorite, I could vaguely feel your aura. However, because of the 3 God sects matter, I had never tried to investigate." Ouyang Luo Shuang's eyes were clear and she was speaking naturally. "I couldn't believe that the weak warrior of that year could have today's attainment. It seems like we can't predict anything." Shi Yang sounded frank and elegant. "I couldn't believe it. You, the goddess of that year, are standing with me to recall our memory. I could never believe that I can be close to you too. Can you not mention this?" Ouyang Luo Shuang wore a cold face. Shi Yang laughed evilly. Are you the new master of the bloodthirsty force? Asked Ouyang Luo Shuang all of a sudden. Oh, you also know the bloodthirsty force? Shi Yang was surprised. Of course, I've heard about it. I've been wandering around the universe for many years. I've experienced many things and of course, I know many secrets, Ouyang Luo Shuang said calmly. Then she asked curiously, I heard that 10,000 years ago, the bloodthirsty force was the malignant tumor of the cosmos. Everyone hated it. The 8 chiefs were so brutal and bloodthirsty, indeed. They had broken the sea of stars. People wanted to destroy that force. They said that it was the source of evil. When she talked about the bloodthirsty force, she didn't have any nice words. There were only negative and malicious ones. Shi Yang smiled and said, Who told you these things? Everyone said like that, she answered casually. It was. I don't know how it was before, but later, I will change it. Shi Yang pondered and then said, The God clan has claimed the world, but they couldn't change it positively. They've been even more extreme than the bloodthirsty force. Because of the God clan's rise, many races went extinct. They aren't good, either. Ouyang Luo Shuang nodded, my teacher said the same. What? Shi Yang was bewildered and more skeptical. He told me that the God Lord had a coma because of severe damages. He had authorized the Elder Committee. The Elder Committee then stirred up the miasma in the God clan. They have many problems, she explained. Shi Yang's suspicion became heavier. He frowned and said nothing. Hey! His mind flickered when Shi Yang suddenly looked at a direction, squinting and furrowing his brows. Why did she come here? Who? Ouyang Luo Shuang asked. Xingming's daughter. Shi Yang rubbed his chin, his eyes awkward. Ouyang Luo Shuang snorted. While I was still captured, I heard Xing Shan and Wei Yun talk about this woman. She has many men. It's true that she has slept with 1,000 men. Shi Yang was surprised. He nodded, I see. That's dirty. Too dirty. I don't want to see her. She stood up. Her slender body flashed and she disappeared. Shortly after, the mature Xing Ying came from afar, swinging her hips and thrusting her chest. She looked sexy with her cherry blossom countenance. Evidently, she wore her best makeup. She giggled, light rippling through her eyes. I represent the broken hall and I would like to apologize. My father and I feel very sorry for what my uncle had done. I'm bringing some goods here to compensate. I don't need her stuff, Ouyang Luo Shuang's voice whispered in Shi Yang's ears. I don't want to see this woman, either. Shi Yang chuckled. Standing on the high tower, he observed Xingying down there and said, Even if you guys want to apologize, it's not you who should come here. Xingming isn't qualified, let alone you girl. His eyes became focused. Shortly after, countless starlight dots turned into brilliant dragons coming out of nowhere. They grabbed Xingying's voluptuous body and directly hauled her away. A moonlight beam emerged. Ouyang Luo Shuang reappeared. She looked at the direction Xingying had been thrown away. Her bold brows twitched. She came for you. This woman was arousing. She came to jump onto your lap. Shi Yang just smiled. I thought you would be happy to welcome her. Although she's dirty, her figure is outstanding. A man like you, well, why did you stop her by the door? Ouyang Luo Shuang's eyes were sparkling. I got you here. No one else is more beautiful. You said that she's dirty. I always keep myself clean and pure, Shi Yang said deliberately. Keep yourself clean and pure. Ouyang Luo Shuang's curved her lips as if she was trying to keep herself from mocking him. Please don't humiliate yourself with such words. Shi Yang darkened his face. Ha! Ouyang Luo Shuang couldn't help but chuckle. She looked like a beautiful frost flower that was so mesmerizing. Shi Yang was lost in that smile. You look really beautiful when you smile, he sincerely complimented. You should smile more. It will make you friendlier. I like when you smile. Ouyang Luo Shuang stopped smiling. She snorted and then said, You're not my man. As far as I know, you were sealed in the meteorite for 1,000 years. I guess you haven't experienced love, right? When I kissed you, you were so frightened. Haha, is it the first time a man touched you? Shi Yang grinned contentedly. Ouyang Luo Shuang's face became cold. Just consider it payment for rescuing you. Shi Yang shrugged. He contemplated for a while and then said, "Can you show me your incipient extent? I always feel familiar to the power you've cultivated. Why do I have to show you?" Ouyang Luo Shuang snorted, but she still released her incipient extent. Her incipient extent was strange. It had bright round moons held high in the sky above the shoreless cold lake. This lake was crystal clear and deep, and it reflected the moonlight. Her incipient extent was so cold as if it was affected by the cold lake. She had fused with the essence of the moon and the cold power. That's why she got this strange incipient extent. As soon as the incipient extent appeared, Shi Yang felt so cold that it was as if he was covered in a world of snow and ice. Indeed, it feels so familiar. Shi Yang observed her incipient extent. His mind flickered and his incipient extent also appeared. The sky was now covered by a beautiful picture. The suns, moons, and stars arose. Life stars slowly spun. The space of this universe was so vast. His incipient extent seemed to cover the entire sea of stars. The lunar stars he had got from the God Clan's precursor had holy, flawless auras that were pretty similar to the moonlight inside Ouyang Luo Shuang's incipient extent. It was even more mysterious. Your incipient extent looks like the vast sea of stars. I have never seen any marvelous incipient extent like this. Ouyang Luo Shuang was astounded. She pulled herself together to observe. She looked shaken. That moon makes me feel so close. You. Retrieve your incipient extent. You can go there to sense the lunar star in my incipient extent, Shi Yang enticed her. Ouyang Luo Shuang was bewildered and her eyes were hesitant. Entering his incipient extent meant handing her life into his hands. Normally, warriors at the same or similar realms would never do that. Unless they were close to each other, they could take risks once to experience. In each warrior's incipient extent, he or she was the only god. The warrior could create miracles or supernatural abilities. Staying in the other's incipient extent was the most passive moment of one's life that was similar to giving his life to the other. Don't linger. If I want to harm you, you think you can be that free? To you, my incipient extent is a good encounter. It's you who can take the chance to learn or not, Shi Yang frowned. Ouyang Luo Shuang gritted her teeth. Pondering for a while, she retrieved her incipient extent and flew up to his incipient extent. Both Ouyang Luo Shuang and Shi Yang had the same wonderful feeling. She felt like she had entered a whole new world while wandering in the vast sea of stars. In this place, Shi Yang's aura was everywhere. She felt like she had entered a deep place of Shi Yang's soul and mind. As soon as Ouyang Luo Shuang entered his incipient extent, his soul shrugged as he felt that he could understand every secret in Ouyang Luo Shuang's mind. He used to experience the same thing. His co-soul could recognize the moods of the creatures on Grace Mainland. He could enter their dreams and minds easily like a real god. At this moment, he had this feeling. In his incipient extent, he was the god and Ouyang Luo Shuang was his citizen. He could control her life and death. Concentrating, his soul consciousness dashed from everywhere and entered Ouyang Luo Shuang's sea of consciousness, soul altar, and even her incipient extent. Ouyang Luo Shuang's incipient extent became a small space inside his incipient extent. He could use his mind to feel it and he could decode the mysteries of her incipient extent through his own incipient extent. It was a marvelous feeling that he couldn't describe. He suddenly had an idea that if he used his devouring power Upanishad now, he could swallow Ouyang Luo Shuang's incipient extent and turn her incipient extent into a part of his incipient extent. Unconsciously, he closed his eyes and tried to comprehend this terrific feeling when someone had entered his incipient extent. In the same manner, Ouyang Luo Shuang had stepped on the moon inside his incipient extent. Now, she knew that this moon was the utmost of the power Upanishad she cultivated. The moonlight here carried the ultimate truth and essence of the power she had been pursuing. Her soul shivered. She was so thrilled as she pulled herself together and sensed the marvel of the moon. Actually, the moons in this incipient extent was the God Clan's precursor's incipient extent that had the essence of the light power Upanishad. To her, a warrior cultivating the moonlight power, It was a priceless treasure. The two then remained in this peculiar condition to find and learn useful abilities and comprehend their powers. Their souls slowly sublimated during this process. Their understanding of power and realm gradually increased. They had temporarily forgotten the time to immerse themselves into this endless marvel. Their souls were trying to comprehend the deep meanings of their powers. They were pursuing a profound comprehension of their power Upanishads. Chapter 1287, Clearly See the Crisis. Chapter 1287, Clearly See the Crisis. A beautiful woman was hung upside down on a branch of an ancient tree that was 100 meters tall. The transparent dragons that bound her disappeared after a long time. Thud. Xingying fell on the ground and rolled. She felt so much pain, her beautiful face filled with rage. Even when she was a child, she had never experienced such humiliation. She had ignored her pride and dignity to jump onto his lap. Not only was she rejected, but she was also thrown away. It was the biggest humiliation in her whole life. Although she had third sky of ethereal god realm cultivation base, she couldn't urge a bit of her energy to strike back the dragons. It made her both outraged and fearful. After waiting until the dragons vanished, she could finally move. Looking at the palace far away, she gritted her teeth and flew back there. Shortly after, she came to the door and attempted to ask for an explanation from Shiyang. However, when she looked up, she became baffled. On a prominent stone tower of the palace, Shiyang's incipient extent emerged like a brilliant galaxy with the diamond-like twinkling stars. Ouyang Luo Shuang was like a moonlight beam moving on the moon inside his incipient extent. Shiyang closed his eyes. His face looked like he was immersed in his world and comprehending his realm. After a glance, she was shaken, but her eyes were so malignant. She had a good understanding of the mysterious magic of the incipient extent and the realm. She knew clearly that when Shiyang opened his incipient extent for Ouyang Luo Shuang, they shouldn't be disturbed. If she seized the chance and took revenge now. Xingying squinted and considered. She couldn't make up her mind yet. Apparently, Shiyang didn't put her in his eyes. He wasn't interested in her. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been that harsh. He would have given her a chance to approach him. She was humiliated when they first met personally. With her natural characteristics, she would take revenge. However, the other was the bloodthirsty force's master. What if? Xingying didn't dare to act rashly. You'd better leave. However, at this moment, Gulling appeared quietly like a forest spirit and looked at her. Xingying's bold brows arched. She threw a glance at Gulling mockingly. So, you're interested in him too? Gulling's small face became so cold as she sneered. You think everybody will be like you? Like a fly attracted to meat when you see a man? You want to bite him or taste him, right? Gulling and Cecilia were good friends and she didn't like Xingying. When she talked to her, she didn't want to be polite. You know what I want to do. Xingying changed her visage, her eyes sinister. No matter what you want to do to Shiyang, I advise you to forget that idea. He's not someone you can offend. Don't bring trouble to your father, your broken hall, or our three forces. Otherwise, no one can protect you. Gullion snorted. You should leave before he wakes up. If he knows you got such ideas, he won't just throw you away like a stray dog. I'm afraid you will become a dead dog. Although Gullion wasn't old, when she talked harshly, she could make people's scalps numb. Xingying's beautiful face became ugly. She knew this place was the Thousand Fantasy Sect's territory and Gullion was Ling Xiong's adopted daughter. She couldn't offend Liang Xiong. Pondering for a while, Xingying threw Gulling a malignant look then left. After Xingying had left, Gullion looked up to watch Shiyang. Her bright eyes became surprised. She saw Shiyang open his incipient extent for Ouyang Luo Shuang and the two of them were bizarrely comprehending their power Upanishads. Shiyang's incipient extent looked like a beautiful and vast galaxy. It caught her eyes. She had seen many incipient extents of incipient god realm experts, but she had never seen a spectacular incipient extent like this one. She suddenly felt small when she lifted up her face and beheld the sky. It seemed that incipient extent had swallowed the entire sea of stars. This incipient extent is really marvelous. If she got a chance to learn her power Upanishad's mysteries in there, she must have a big harvest. I wonder if Cecilia has had the good opportunity to cultivate in his incipient extent. This man is too flirty. He loves every beauty he's met. Despicable. Gullion muttered at first, but later on, her small face became colder as she shouted at the end. Dash! A remote area on the Fantasy Star. There were some green bamboo cottages covered in the thick white mist. This kind of white mist was so strange that it could prevent all kinds of soul energy, soul consciousness, and even noises from intruding the place. Inside a bamboo cottage, Lena of the Heaven River Temple frowned. Floating in front of her was a big drop of water that was showing the scene of Shi Yang and Ouyang Luo Shuang comprehending power Upanishads together. Cecilia looked dispirited. She sat quietly in the room and watched the drop of water. She bit her lower lip and said nothing. He took a ride on Tsunamic Chamber of Commerce's ships. Then, he got into a dispute with warriors from the Broken Hall because of that girl. He said that she was his woman. Caesar had to apologize. We thought that he didn't have any relationship with this girl and he said that just to save her but. Lena looked at Cecilia. She found that Cecilia looked painful and bitter. She sighed and then continued. But it seems like they do have something. Otherwise, she wouldn't enter his incipient extent like that without any caution. Also, he has opened his incipient extent so she could learn the marvel in there. I don't believe that they don't have any relationship. Cecilia kept her head low and didn't answer her. He doesn't deserve it. I think so. I've heard about him. This guy is a womanizer. He has never lacked women on his side wherever he goes. You're just a passenger in his life. To him, you're no different from the other women. And if you consider him a place to shelter your body and soul, you will be living in pain for the rest of your life, Lena comforted her. Cecilia thinned her lips and contemplated. After a long time, she lifted her head, her beautiful eyes showing her begrudging suffering. When I first met him, I've known who he is already. However, I've never met anyone more outstanding than him. He has touched my heart. If I let him go, I will regret it. If I hold on to him, I will sink into sorrow. But when the latter happens, I've experienced something that I can recall later. If I choose the former, I can save myself from pain, but I will miss a piece of my life. Teacher, what do you advise me? Lena was surprised as she looked at Cecilia. After a moment, she shook her head and sighed. Seems like I should keep you here for a while more. Teacher, why do the masters have to do that? Cecilia was skeptical. After 100,000 years, the four great clans have taken turns to control the entire cosmos. They've risen and defeated. They've kept stirring up the universe. There are many forces and races, and even galaxies have disappeared forever because of them. These four big forces are the fountainhead of evil in this world. Lena looked at her and said reluctantly, unfortunately, they're too powerful. In their battles, the other forces always play the supporting roles. They have to share the burden with them without any other option. We were willing to let them act like that until now. We and the other forces that aren't the four great creatures want to make them content to their lot. We will save and keep the peace of this universe. Well, to be frank, the Thousand Fantasy Sect, the Broken Hall, and our Heaven River Temple have accumulated for so many years. And now, we think that we got the power to control the world. We want to try once. Right. Cecilia hit the nail on the head. Lena was surprised. She smiled. Yeah, it will develop like that. What do they want to do? Asked Cecilia. Hand back Bloodthirstis remains to Shi Yang and agree to form the alliance with them. After he's left the Fantasy Star, they will spread this information. The God Clan will then send the experts to kill him. The bloodthirsty force will also know this. They will send people to protect him. Then, after they leave the Thousand Fantasy Star area, the war will take place officially. It will be a deadly one for both sides, said Lena. I got it. Shi Yang is the pawn to ignite the flame of war. We will stimulate them and make them fight before they've prepared carefully. Then, we will watch and choose the side to support, said Cecilia. My excellent student. Your thoughts are clear. Yeah, you're not wrong. Lena complimented her student. Inside Shi Yang's incipient extent, time and space seemed to cease to move. He controlled everything. If he wanted time to slow down, it slowed down. Ouyang Luo Shuang stayed in his incipient extent. She moved around the moons in there and seemed to not want to come back. She was trying to comprehend the essence of the God Clan's precursors' power Upanishads. She didn't care about the time passing by. Shi Yang sank into his incipient extent and searched between the space and star powers Upanishads. After an unknown time, he woke up. He pulled himself together, frowning and sensing. In his incipient extent, a massive starlight hand grabbed Ouyang Luo Shuang by her waist and pulled her out of a lake. She was put back to the real world. Shi Yang looked at Ouyang Luo Shuang, his eyes complicated. After he had analyzed Ouyang Luo Shuang's power Upanishads and incipient extent, he came to a conclusion: Ouyang Luo Shuang's teacher must be a God Clan's expert. He could never look down on some experts who had mastered the power Upanishad of the God Clan's ancestors and imparted it to Ouyang Luo Shuang at first sky of incipient God realm. Ouyang Luo Shuang had mentioned that this man was heading to Fantasy Star to do something. Shi Yang had a bad premonition. Vaguely, he felt a big crisis coming soon. He looked at Ouyang Luo Shuang and pondered. Suddenly, he said, in the coming time, if the situation doesn't turn right, I will have to do something that will make you hate me. I want to warn you in advance. Don't worry. I won't hurt you, but I have to tell you in advance. Since his words were vague, Ouyang Luo Shuang couldn't understand it. What do you mean? I mean, perhaps I need to use you to achieve my goal. Shi Yang's eyes were strange. Use me? What value do I have that you can use? Her clear eyes were confused. She didn't know her teacher's identity. She just knew that he was very intimidating. As she couldn't relate Shi Yang and her teacher, of course, she couldn't guess what Shi Yang had in his mind. Well, you just need to know that. When the time comes, you will understand what I meant today. Chapter 1288, Carefree. Chapter 1288, Carefree. The islet in the middle of the fantasy lake. Ling Xiong, Caesar, and Lorraine were discussing how to talk to Shi Yang tomorrow. They considered whether they should give him some challenge before giving him the bloodthirstis remains or not. If they just gave them to him, would that be too direct? His realm is a little low. If we give him a challenge, I'm afraid he can't handle it. Even though we have to give him these things, we must do it like we care about it. Sigh, it's troublesome, though. Lorraine forced a smile. Yeah, it's just first sky of incipient God realm. It isn't worth mentioning. If he wasn't the new master, he wouldn't be respected. But if we give the remains to him easily, will he doubt us or not? Asked Ling Xiong. Don't look at me. You guys are the masters in this sort of stuff. I don't know how to act in such a conspiracy. Caesar waved his hands. Ling Xiong and Lorraine went stiff when they heard Caesar. They looked a little embarrassed. All of a sudden, Ling Xiong changed his countenance. An ancient book flew out of his sleeve. He touched the void and the blood flipped its pages. A magical energy emerged from the page like white light rings outside the planet. It seemed like he could use this book to check the changes that happened outside his fantasy star. At the same time, a soul message came from the book to Ling Xiong's sea of consciousness. Caesar and Lorraine kept silent. They frowned, watching Ling Xiong and waiting. They knew that the ancient book was a strange treasure in Ling Xiong's hands that was called the Book of Thousand Fantasy and Myriad Change. This book could connect to the marvelous fantasy zone and create illusions there. They all looked at Ling Xiong as they wanted to know what was going on. Ling Xiong had ordered his subordinates not to disturb them when they began to discuss unless it was something really important. As they were still discussing these matters, if someone contacted Ling Xiong now, it meant that the news wasn't small. Indeed, Ling Xiong put away the Book of Thousand Fantasy and Myriad Change into his sleeve. His face slightly paled. There is a tornado of meteorite pieces that appeared out of nowhere in the fantasy zone. Billions of these pieces have attacked the fantasy zone like sharp sword. The white light rings outside the planet have stopped them. But they have already hurt and killed many fantasy animals and my troopers. Who has the guts to do that? Lorraine's face was grave. This place was the headquarters star of the Thousand Fantasy Sect, and the Thousand Fantasy Sect was the prominent force in this universe that not many forces dared to provoke. Besides those lunatics of the four great creatures, I think no blind warrior dares to act wantonly in my fantasy zone. Ling Xiong's handsome face turned cold and dark. They reported that they saw a lazy man riding the moon nucleus and approaching our fantasy star. What does he look like? Lorraine was startled. She thought that she knew something. They said that he looks lazy. Along the way, he still drank wine and ate fruits casually. He doesn't mind our guards much, Ling Xiong said coldly. Lazy. 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 Lorraine was shocked as a light flashed in her head. She hissed in fright. Carefree. It's Carefree. Hearing her, Ling Xiong and Caesar were startled. It's him. The girl's teacher is Carefree. I should have guessed it earlier, shouted Lorraine. As Ling Xiong and Caesar heard about the name Carefree, their countenances became very serious. Thoughts rolled into their brains. Relating the name to the familiar feeling they had earlier, they knew Lorraine was correct. Carefree was coming. Carefree was one of the four great heavenly kings of the God clan and a supernatural character of the previous generation. This man had disappeared for thousands of years. It had been so long that Caesar, Ling Xiong, and Lorraine couldn't figure it out earlier. When Carefree was famous and intimidating, Ling Xiong, Caesar, and Lorraine were still juniors at incipient God realm who still needed to follow their teachers. They knew Carefree's deeds well. Thus, they all discolored when they knew that it was Carefree who was approaching. Rumble. Rumble. The fantasy star suddenly shook hard as if a massive beast was barging at it. The ground of the fantasy star shook hard. Many mountains collapsed and rivers surged. The quiet fantasy star for countless years seemed to about to receive its doomsday. All the warriors of the Thousand Fantasy Sect were frightened. Where is the Thousand Fantasy Sect's master? Open the gate. Do you want me to break your door? A voice came from deep inside the clouds above the fantasy star that then reverberated in every corner of the planet and shook the minds of every warrior. As soon as that voice arose, it was like the heavenly prestige pressing on the sky of the fantasy star and suffocating people. Here he comes, Caesar hissed. He can break it, really. Let him in. Lorraine forced a smile. Ling Xiong nodded and then took out the heavenly fragrant soul-soothing jade box. After giving it to Lorraine, Ling Xiong said, "You should hurry and find Shiyang. Give the box to him and ask him to leave immediately." Caesar also gave his box to Lorraine. "Tell that kid to flee quickly. If he dies here, we will all be in trouble." Lorraine didn't say anything. She grabbed the boxes and disappeared instantly. At the same time, the terrible shock came from the sky as the voice arose again. It's not easy for the Thousand Fantasy Sect to refine layers of barriers and restrictions. What a pity if this protection gets damaged. I will count to 3. People down there, you should consider carefully. 1. Ling Xiong sighed and then spoke up. Welcome Precursor Carefree. I'm the current master of the Thousand Fantasy Sect, Ling Xiong. Welcome to our headquarters. His finger fiddled with the Book of Thousand Fantasy and Myriad Change to lift up the barrier so Carefree could enter the planet. A tender, handsome man rode the moon essence and crossed the sky to come. He landed directly to the center land of the fantasy star. Many warriors on the fantasy star gathered as they saw him. The fantasy lake where Ling Xiong and Caesar were standing changed suddenly. The thick forest and grand palaces replaced the lake, the cottages, and the mountain ranges. Ban Yu, Xing Ming, Xing Shong, Wei Yun, and Gullion appeared from the palaces around and looked at the man in fear. Many of them didn't know him, but they were still scared. The imposing aura of the man descended from the sky had completely subdued them and made them want to bow to him. Who attacked my student at the chaotic area out there? After a deafening explosion, the moon underneath Carefree's feet had destroyed some palaces. He landed and lazily raked his eyes around. He saw Xing Shong and grinned. Xing Shong felt like his soul had left him already. Come here, Carefree waved his hand. Xing Shang and Wei Yun were lifted in the same way a person pinched a chicken's neck and lifted it up. They fell in front of Carefree. Carefree opened his mouth and spurt out 2 beams of moonlight that then intruded Xing Shang's and Wei Yun's brains through their eyes. The moonlight then moved around their sea of consciousness to collect their memories. As the others were watching them, Xing Shang and Wei Yun were so frightened. Dark blood oozed out of their eyes, ears, nostrils, and mouth. The light in their eyes dimmed out. Their skies dried up as if it was dry tree bark. They lost their vitality quickly. Everybody felt their hair rising as they were so panic-stricken. They knew Carefree had used a memory extraction technique to take their memories directly that had destroyed their lives and souls to get the part of memory he needed. Xing Ming felt so chilled. At this moment, he thought he was frozen by a cold power. He couldn't help but shiver. His eyes were filled with a dark fear. He looked at Caesar, gritting his teeth and begging, "Master, please consider that I've served both you and your father. Please spare my life." After he finished, Xing Shang's and Wei Yun's life energy were all gone. Carefree had collected what he wanted. Carefree smiled darkly and looked at him. "Turns out you're the ringleader." "Master," Xing Ming screamed, kneeled down, and pounded his head on the ground, begging Caesar. His head bled terribly. Xing Ying stood next to him. She was bewildered for a while and then kneeled down, crying and pounding her head against the floor. She didn't mind her bleeding face or the pain and continued to beg to Caesar. "Please, Hall Master, please save my father." At this moment, they knew that only if Caesar helped him, Xing Ming could survive. Since this man could kill Xing Shang and Wei Yun easily and the others couldn't even wiggle a bit, they knew that he was at the immortal realm. This sort of character could effortlessly kill them with only a wave of his hand. Caesar, the warrior obsessed with martial arts, had a dark and calm face like the water. He looked at Xing Ming and Xing Ying who were pounding their heads on the floor to beg him, talking all of a sudden. "Precursor Carefree, 2 warriors of our broken hall were killed. Please let it go. Let it go." Carefree was surprised. He eyed Caesar and asked, "You're Simon's son, right?" "Haha. Your father had to call me senior. Your broken hall's warriors dared to kidnap my student. Well, it's simple to let it go. When all the ones involved in this kidnapping case are dead, I will let it go." He rose one hand to grab Xing Ming and squinted, his face dark and sinister. "Nu!" Xing Ming shouted ear-splittingly. "My father gave you face, but it doesn't mean that I will do the same," Caesar suddenly screamed. His hempen clothes floated with powerful lightning strikes. He stepped toward Carefree and raised his fist. His punch was rough and simple. Boom! Boom! The space next to Carefree exploded continuously. The billions of lightning bolts moved together as if they wanted to create billions of holes in this world. Caesar cultivated lightning power Upanishad. Usually, warriors with the lightning power Upanishad could cultivate the electricity power Upanishad at the same time. It made them stronger. Simon, Caesar's father, cultivated both power Upanishad. However, Caesar didn't use that method. He had cultivated only lightning power Upanishad. In 10,000 years, he was immersed in the world of only lightning, offering it everything beautiful in his life. He didn't like women. He had ignored the matters of the broken hall. He didn't enjoy life. Just like an ascetical monk, he had dedicated his life to find the path of his cultivation and the lightning power Upanishad. He had not been lazy for even a day. This punch of his had the passion of his lifelong pursuit of lightning power. His attack had torn the sky and stimulated the 8 poles of the world. The lightning strikes shook the sky and reverberated like Caesar's angry roar. His roar was formidable and overbearing with the loneliness accumulated for 10,000 years. Carefree, the expert of the previous generation, had a grave face standing in billions of lightning strikes. His eyes emitted magical lights. Carefree's eyes squinted and created crescent moons. The 3 illusions of the moon above the fantasy star's sky spun and became real, moving around Carefree. They shattered and exploded continuously as if they were about to destroy this entire world. Caesar stopped after that punch. However, there were countless punches in the void between him and Carefree. The punches were like thunder in the sky that created a world of pure lightning. Chapter 1289, Unyielding. Chapter 1289, Unyielding. Caesar didn't move for even a bit, but his punches had filled the void by carefree and created an endless magical world. You're much better than your father. You're closer to second sky of immortal realm than the other two. You've comprehended the ultimate essence of lightning. But it's unfortunate that your soul can't transform yet. Carefree looked at Caesar and complimented, but it's not enough to stop me. Anyway, I'm at a higher realm. I had to spend 7,000 years to break through to this realm. Thus, you can only watch me kill him. Carefree looked at Xingming and smiled. A crescent moon arose on Xingming's chest. It then stabbed his heart, broke his body, and shot towards Xingming's soul altar. The moon shattered his soul altar immediately. Carefree touched his head. A bright full moon arose. This bright moon was so pure and was created by billions of the god power's beams. The bright moon changed and magically erased Caesar's punches in the air. When Carefree was attacking Caesar, he killed Xingming. Unless Caesar troubled him and distracted his mind, Caesar couldn't prevent him from killing Xingming. Apparently, Caesar wasn't strong enough to keep Carefree's full attention. That was why Xingming was dead now. Xingying's face was bleeding. She stopped pounding her head against the floor. She was ashen as she looked at her father, who was a corpse now. Her face was dark and glum as if her soul had left her. Caesar. Lorraine hissed all of a sudden. Caesar wore a brave face. He had prepared to take risks. He looked as if he was struggling in his mind. Caesar, hissed Lorraine once more time. Caesar's tense nerves relaxed. The expressions in his eyes changed for a while before he resumed his normal visage. Carefree looked like he appreciated Caesar a lot. His dark eyes became tender. He spoke up all of a sudden. I'm here to discuss with the Thousand Fantasy Sect, Broken Hall, and Heaven River Temple. We want to exchange an entire star area for each piece of bloodthirstis remains. We can carry it out immediately. Ling Xiong had guessed his purpose earlier. Hearing him, he replied with a forced smile. We gave the remains to the new master of the bloodthirsty force. We got a good deal already. Carefree squinted. He immediately recognized that Lorraine wasn't here. The moonlight swirled in his eyes. After a while, he grinned. Well, your fantasy star is really extraordinary. Even I was misled. He moved and his figure faded. Caesar and Ling Xiong exchanged looks. They were so frightened. They left and headed to Shiyang. Gullion, Ban Yu, and the others hurried to move to the palace that the Thousand Fantasy Sect had lodged the distinguished guests. On the other side, Carefree is here. You take the 3 boxes and leave the Fantasy Star now. They contain bloodthirstis remains. I have discussed with Caesar and Ling Xiong. Once you guys and the God Clan start the war, our 3 forces will support you. Lorraine appeared out of nowhere and gave him the 3 heavenly fragrant soul-soothing jade boxes. She urged him to leave immediately. Carefree? Heavenly King Carefree of the God Clan? Shiyang asked calmly. Hurry up. I'm afraid the illusions of the Fantasy Star can't hold him for long. You cultivate space power Upanishad, right? You better tear the void and leave now. Return to your ancient continent, Lorraine urged him. Shiyang lifted his head to look at the sky, his face grimaced. With the connection between Shiyang and Grace Mainland, he could return to the land with the last beam of his energy while he was in the chaotic space basin. However, he tried and found the space was so heavy as if countless mountain ranges were pressing on it. He couldn't even move. He immediately realized that it was too late. Carefree had noticed him. Carefree is here. I can't leave. Shiyang looked at Lorraine and frowned. Abruptly, he turned away and grabbed Ouyang Luo Shuang. He placed one hand on her back and urged his power. He whispered into her ear, I'm so sorry. Ouyang Luo Shuang was shocked because of what Lorraine had said. She knew that her teacher was called Carefree and the one Shiyang and Lorraine had mentioned was the Heavenly King Carefree, the peak existence of the God Clan. She needed time to arrange her thoughts. As she wasn't cautious, Shi Yang grabbed her. When she recognized the situation, it was too late to wiggle. Shi Yang had controlled her body in just a blink of an eye. Ouyang Luo Shuang felt chilled and she snarled, "What are you doing? I've told you before that I have to use you sometimes. And now, it's the moment." Shi Yang forced a smile and apologized. A strange light shot out from his eyes as he pulled the 3 boxes Lorraine had given him and threw them into the space inside his incipient extent. Then, his face became dark and cold. The murderous aura twirled around him brutally. "Sorry," he said. Then, Carefree came from the sky and landed in front of him. "Teacher," Ouyang Luo Shuang screamed, her eyes regaining consciousness. Carefree squinted and looked at her and then at Shi Yang. "You're the Bloodthirster's successor?" Shi Yang nodded. "Only at first sky of incipient god realm. Too low. I can kill you easily. Yeah, hand me Bloodthirster's remains and release my disciple. I will let you go." "I'm a man of his word," Carefree said indifferently. "I want to leave and I want to bring Bloodthirster's remains with me. Tell me what I should do." Shi Yang replied coldly. "It means you will die." Carefree shook his head. Ling Xiong and Caesar arrived. Gullion and Ban Yu stopped far from them and watched with complicated eyes. They hadn't thought that they would see such a situation when they came. They were dumbfounded. Before Carefree had arrived, Shi Yang had said that Ouyang Luo Shuang was his woman. He had forced Caesar to admit his mistake and forced Xing Shong to chop off his arm. But now, he was keeping Ouyang Luo Shuang as his hostage to bargain with Carefree. How heartless was this man to be able to switch his face like that? At the critical time, he could use his woman to cushion his back. How despicable and vicious was this man? Many people disdained him. They thought that they had wronged him. He failed the others so badly. Only Caesar, Ling Xiong, Lorraine, and Gullion nodded discreetly. They knew that what Shi Yang was doing was the only way that gave him a chance to talk to Carefree. They highly appreciated Shi Yang's evil and agile wisdom. They thought that only this kind of character could compete against the God Clan. "I got 2 souls. You know this, right? If you kill this soul of mine, I can still exist. But I know your student can't do that. Yeah, I don't know how much you favor your student. Perhaps you don't mind her being dead or alive." Shi Yang looked at Carefree and spoke. "If so, I can only blame my bad luck. I know what had happened from Xing Shong's and Wei Yun's souls. Although you aren't my disciple's lover, you guys are friends. Otherwise, you wouldn't rescue her. Since you've saved her, just give me Bloodthirster's remains. You can leave then. Is this clear?" Carefree squinted. "I want to take the remains with me." Shi Yang was persistent. "I believe that you won't hurt your friends. Your threat is just a funny joke in my eyes." Carefree sounded nonchalant. "Oh, really?" Shi Yang's eyes were cold. A bone thorn appeared in his hand. With a swift move of his wrist, the bone thorn directly thrust into Ouyang Luo Shuang's abdomen. Ouyang Luo Shuang went numb, her bright eyes filled with fear. She had never thought that Shi Yang would attack her. Feeling the agony in her tummy, she gritted her teeth in resentment. She thought that once she escaped, she would make Shi Yang lose his face. Now she understood the strange words he had told her. She knew what use Shi Yang had mentioned. Although Shi Yang had promised that he wouldn't kill her, this wound on her body was real. She hated Shi Yang for his bold and cruel deeds. He attacked her. Shi Yang could feel Ouyang Luo Shuang's body so stiff. As their bodies were so close to each other, Shi Yang could feel her resentment and even her soul movement. Perhaps it was related to Ouyang Luo Shuang's activity in his incipient extent. It seemed like the subtle connection between them hadn't been cut off yet. But he had no choice. He knew Ouyang Luo Shuang would trouble him later, but he had to be persistent now. Space here was locked. Carefree was at second sky of immortal realm. Thus, Ouyang Luo Shuang was his only escape. She was the last trick he had to protect himself. He was lucky that he could guess Ouyang Luo Shuang's teacher was some powerful character of the God Clan. Ban Yu, Gullion, Gulling, and the others were aghast. They were dumbstruck looking at the bleeding wound in Ouyang Luo Shuang's abdomen. They didn't expect that Shi Yang dared to attack her. Carefree hadn't thought that he dared to that, either. When Ouyang Luo Shuang was stabbed, he became hesitant. He had anticipated that Shi Yang wouldn't attack her, and what he had done was all he could do. He wasn't going to make it more terrible. However, it was just his prediction from what he got from Xing Shang's and Wei Yun's memories. He wasn't so sure or able to confirm anything. It was because he didn't know Shi Yang. He didn't know how this successor of Bloodthirsty was. At the same time, Ouyang Luo Shuang was the only warrior whose cultivation path was much appropriate in the past 10,000 years. That's why he decided to impart Ouyang Luo Shuang the marvelous power Upanishad even though she wasn't a member of the God clan. He considered Ouyang Luo Shuang his only official disciple and nurtured her. He had refined a moon for Ouyang Luo Shuang to cultivate. It spoke up the fact that he really favored and appreciated this disciple he had when he was already old. He didn't want to lose this disciple. Thus, he didn't dare to bet. After I can confirm that I'm safe, I'll let her go. Shi Yang saw Carefree hesitating. He then grabbed Ouyang Luo Shuang and flew up into the sky. He didn't wait for Carefree to answer. Shi Yang controlled space power, but he couldn't tear the void to escape instantly. However, it wasn't a problem to fly now. He planned to leave this area and find the area Carefree had unlocked to open the space passage there to return to Grace Mainland. As long as Shi Yang could return to Grace Mainland, even if Carefree came there in his world, he had the guts to fight with that expert once. He used to fight with Azure Dragon on Grace Mainland. He knew that even if he couldn't resist, he could still leave easily. Seeing Shi Yang holding Ouyang Luo Shuang and flying away from the Fantasy Star, Carefree was outraged, but he was trying to press it down. His face was sinister. He didn't linger on the Fantasy Star anymore. He immediately flew up and chased after Shi Yang. He planned to lock more space and observe Shi Yang. Once he could confirm that Shi Yang didn't want to kill Ouyang Luo Shuang, he was going to storm over to trouble him. Chapter 1290, Life Sublimation. Chapter 1290, Life Sublimation. After Shi Yang and Carefree had left, the Fantasy Star resumed its peace and quiet. However, Ling Xiong, Caesar, and Lorraine still grimaced. Carefree had come suddenly and broken their plan. They couldn't help but give Shi Yang bloodthirsty remains. They didn't even have time to discuss the details of their alliance. Everything was rushed. Ling Xiong, Caesar, and Lorraine were at first sky of Immortal Realm. After they had reached this realm, they had developed a wild scheme to conquer the world. However, today, when Carefree gave them a sudden visit, he was like thunder that had struck their minds. Carefree has reached second sky of Immortal Realm. I suppose the other 3 heavenly kings are at this realm too. In addition to the God Lord, we have to be very cautious, Lorraine sighed. I didn't expect him to come. However, it turns out that it isn't bad. Although it's a little different from what we've expected, it's not bad at all, Ling Xiong pondered and then said. We must spread the news. Tell Tsunami Chamber of Commerce. If Shi Yang encounters bad things in our 1000 Fantasy Star area, we can't explain clearly to the others. This kid is evil. He can turn his back to her directly and use her to bargain. He's heartless, indeed, Caesar appraised Shi Yang. I think he won't die that easily, Lorraine nodded. We shouldn't be the vanguard in the war with the God clan. They're so formidable, said Ling Xiong. Caesar and Lorraine nodded in agreement. Carefree coming here today made them realize that it wasn't exaggerated that the God clan could be the overlord of this cosmos for 10,000 years. By the edge of the Fantasy Star. Shi Yang held Ouyang Luo Shuang and flew quickly like a beam of starlight. His face was stern, his eyes bright with brilliant lights. He continually checked the surroundings and didn't dare to relax for even a second. Because of the pressure that had chased after him as if it was his shadow, he knew that Carefree was still following Shi Yang, although Shi Yang didn't see Carefree. He was somewhere around for sure. He had escaped the Fantasy Star, but the space around was still locked. He couldn't find a slit to return to Grace Mainland. The layers of space were tight as if there was a massive hand squeezing them all together. Unless that hand loosened its grip, Shi Yang couldn't move through spaces. That heavy pressure came like a rising tide that troubled him while he was flying through the fantasy zone. He had to consume his god power every second and every minute. It wasn't a normal trip. Because of Carefree's pressure, he had to spend a lot more energy than usual. Engaging in a battle with an expert at this level, Shi Yang finally felt helpless. It was because of the difference between their realms, his space, star, and death and life power Upanishads. His abilities were ineffective. They couldn't bring expected results. If he didn't hold Ouyang Luo Shuang, Carefree was going to kill him for sure. Finally, he recognized a begrudging fact. His realm was too low compared to the formidable experts who had survived for more than 10,000 years. He could clearly feel that his current incipient god realm cultivation base wasn't enough to deal with the future commotions. He had to break through faster to a whole new world. It would be best that he could enter the immortal realm. Shi Yang knew that the gap between the immortal realm and incipient god realm was like the distance between the sky and the deep abyss. The power and capacity of the immortal realm experts weren't something that peak of incipient god realm and the false immortal realm experts could compare to. Where are you taking me? Ouyang Luo Shuang's wound had stopped bleeding. Although her body was confined, she could still speak. How long do you plan to keep me as your hostage? Shi Yang's face was cold as he shouted at her. Shut up. Then, the starlight emitted from his palm like a river and flowed into Ouyang Luo Shuang's body to restrict her ability to talk. Afterward, he checked his surroundings carefully as he knew that a pair of dark eyes was still watching him from a secret place nearby. Shi Yang knew that Carefree was right behind him and observing his moves. If he relaxed his nerves for even a moment, trouble would snatch over him immediately. If Carefree could confirm that Shi Yang wouldn't kill Ouyang Luo Shuang from her words, Shi Yang would be tragically and instantly killed. Thus, he had to shut Ouyang Luo Shuang's mouth. Since he had come to this world, he had never struggled like this. The feeling of having someone determine his life had choked him and irritated him. Because of Carefree's pressure, he had to consume a lot of energy to move through the fantasy zone. After each distance, his god power reduced massively. He had to stay alert all the time. He had to pose that he could kill Ouyang Luo Shuang in any minute, which would scare Carefree and keep him from acting rashly. It was some sort of torment, indeed. Actually, not far from Shi Yang, Carefree was sitting on the moon nucleus like a patient hunter watching his prey. He released his energy unceasingly to affect the space that prevented Shi Yang from tearing a space slit to escape to Grace Mainland. As long as Shi Yang didn't get out of his sight, he could find the chance. Once Shi Yang relaxed, he could seize the chance to rescue his student and kill Shi Yang. He was waiting for an opportunity and competing with Shi Yang to see who was more patient. He was confident that he would be the winner. Carefree was the domineering expert in Bloodthirst's era and he was a peerless existence in the world at that time. As he had lived for more than 10,000 years, he had experienced many things. He had immersed in the mediating condition for countless years to train his mind and power Upanishad. His state of mind had been trained to become flawless. Carefree thought that Shi Yang was still very young, so it would be a funny joke when he dared to struggle against him. Carefree had discreetly released his power to trouble Shi Yang more when he was flying. It was going to wear out Shi Yang's god power and mental power. He sneered and waited for Shi Yang to use up his energy. When Shi Yang's spirit broke, he could strike him only one time to kill him. Shi Yang was also waiting. He felt so reluctant. He knew what idea Carefree had in his head, but he couldn't do anything to counter it. Shi Yang got an idea. He believed that Caesar's team had notified Xian He, Frederick, and Ming Hao about Carefree. He believed that Xian He, Frederick, and Ming Hao wouldn't let him die. Because today, he was the new master of the Bloodthirsty Force and the new flag of the Bloodthirsty Force. Moreover, he was wearing the Bloodvein ring. He had to get out of this place. He knew that Carefree was trying to drain him and was waiting for him to be exhausted. He could only try his best. He also needed time. Xian He and Frederick needed time to get to him. He believed that if he could seize more time, it would be a chance for him to overturn the situation. He strongly believed in this. Shi Yang continued to use his god power and kept moving forward through the fantasy zone. One was running and the other was following discreetly. The two of them were having a long battle of attrition in the fantasy zone. Speaking about attrition, Shi Yang wasn't Carefree's opponent. Shortly after, Shi Yang couldn't stand it anymore. The god power in his body became faint and faded away. Carefree thought he had seen hope. But at this moment, Shi Yang began to use his new sources of energy. They were the blood chi, the negative energy in his veins, and the star energy. Those were the alternatives he often used to replace the god power. Under Carefree's pressure, he had released himself from all restraints. He used up his energy to train his spirit and will. His understanding of power Upanishads and his soul were sublimated. They were all increasing inexplicably. His life magnetic field has sublimated. This kid has extraordinary innate talents. He is worthy of being that guy's successor. In the dark, secret void, Carefree mumbled to himself. He sounded very surprised. The life magnetic field was the core of the soul seal. It was the key feature that meant that the highly intelligent creatures were more prominent than the other creatures. For example, the life magnetic field of the four great creatures was one level greater than the other races. They had the advantage in approaching the perfect condition. The life magnetic field could sublimate and evolve with the soul seal so the creature could reach another height of life. However, not anyone could have the chance to sublimate his life magnetic field. Only those with the origins of the ancient continents could have the opportunity with adequate natural endowments. It was magical and unpredictable. As Carefree was the God Lord's subordinate, he knew the mysteries when the life magnetic field sublimated. The God Lord used to experience that. He said that it was a magnificent experience that he couldn't explain clearly. It was much more important than breaking through to a new realm. It was because it would happen when the warrior didn't recognize it. The warrior wouldn't lose his consciousness. He would be extremely responsive, which was different from the dumb and dreamy condition when a warrior comprehended a new realm. That was why Carefree didn't dare to act rashly. He just observed and felt amazed. Shi Yang didn't know what was really happening when his life magnetic field sublimated. Still feeling Carefree's pressure, he realized that his soul became crystal clear and the three power Upanishads took turns to emerge on his soul altar. Suddenly, many matters that Shi Yang found difficult to understand were clear to him now. It felt like a dummy got a divine potion and had his intelligence rocket. He became a genius all of a sudden. It was the soul transformation. It was similar to when a beast with low intelligence became smarter when its level increased. He could vaguely feel that this encounter that had changed his soul altar and his soul had come from the origin and the genesis fruit that he had fused. It was somehow the result of the fusion at a deeper level with Grace Mainland. It wasn't that he was comprehending his realm and power Upanishad. It was the transformation of his soul seal. Although he was still under Carefree's pressure, the worry and anxiety in his mind had lifted up. He carried Ouyang Luo Shuang and flew rapidly. Along the way, his soul altar and sea of consciousness were calm without any ripples. Many issues he hadn't comprehended now opened to him like bright, open windows. Shi Yang looked relaxed and calm. As he knew that Carefree was watching him, he instinctively knew how to deal with him. Shi Yang gripped Ouyang Luo Shuang and released his pressure to tell Carefree that he was still cautious like a wild beast living in the forest for so many years. When it faced the danger, it used its instincts to predict and prepare with the perfect condition. In such a condition, he had left the fantasy zone and moved to the middle area of the 1000 fantasy star area. When he had left the fantasy zone, he had a sudden understanding as if he could find the chance to overturn the situation in any minute and escape. His opportunity actually showed up. A dim light dot appeared in front of him. In just a blink of an eye, it ballooned like a massive mouth and swallowed him directly. Then, it shrank rapidly. Before Carefree came, it had disappeared strangely. When Carefree appeared, Shi Yang had vanished into thin air and nothing was left behind, not even his aura. It was like he didn't exist in this universe. Chapter 1291, De Carlos. Chapter 1291, De Carlos. Carefree was sitting cross-legged on the moon nucleus and hovering outside the fantasy zone, his eyes dark and cold. He had released his soul consciousness to move around. In just a glimpse, his soul consciousness had skimmed through the vast area of the 1,000 fantasy star R and searched each life star. He got nothing. Carefree made a conclusion: Shi Yang had torn the space and ran away. This conclusion made him sober. He knew that he had closed the space here and Shi Yang wasn't able to tear even a small slit. He immediately confirmed that someone had helped Shi Yang and delivered him away. If that expert could take someone from the space he had sealed, that expert's realm wasn't lower than his. Also, that one must be a master in space power Upanishad. A character popped up in his mind. With a cold countenance, he talked to the void, his voice glum. "DeCarlos, you messed up with my business." The wind howled from a deep area ahead of Carefree. Billions of strange lights burst off, shooting everywhere and cutting through that area, mincing space into pieces. In a narrow space slit, a wrinkled old man wearing a long, white robe emerged. He was sitting on a massive empty fantasy crystal. Hovering by the mouth of the space slit, the old man talked begrudgingly. "Carefree, long time no see. But I don't actually want to see you. You messed with my important business right when you saw me. And now, you tell me you don't want to see me." Carefree's eyes were dark and deep as he said coldly, "DeCarlos, our God clan hasn't troubled you once in 10,000 years. Today, you interfered with my business. Do you want to stand against the God clan?" No, I don't dare." The old man forced a smile. His face looked like he had owed the others a lot of favors. "I have no choice. I have to repay my debt. I showed myself to tell you that your disciple will be all right. Don't worry. I'll keep an eye on her. Also, you should notify the Bradley family. I delivered that kid to Thunder Firmament Star area, which is under their management. The warriors of the Bradley family based there could have some trouble." Was it the request of the president of Chamber of Commerce or Ming Hao? Carefree thundered. "Don't ask me. I was begrudging, you know. Sigh, I didn't want to join, but they keep chasing after me. I've been quiet for thousands of years and they've still kept their eyes on me. My life is so awful." DeCarlos shook his head. The space slit where he hovered closed little by little while the void Carefree had troubled was smoothened and resumed its normal status. DeCarlos was the warrior with the best space power Upanishad in the cosmos. He was the sort of character that could make the 4 big clans troubled. This old man could move through spaces like a shuttle. No one could stop him. He was the target that the big forces wanted to recruit. However, until now, he didn't make it clear that he wanted to join any force. He hadn't admitted his membership in Tsunami Chamber of Commerce, either. Anyway, the warriors of Tsunami Chamber of Commerce always respected him. They assumed that he was the person that ranked only behind their president. Ban Yu had assumed that Shi Yang was DeCarlos' later generation when they were outside of the fantasy star. Thus, they had changed their attitude toward him. They had made Xingshong and Wei Yun hesitate to attack him. It was because of DeCarlos' fame. Today, the character that Ban Yu had assumed to have a relationship with Shi Yang had appeared. He had delivered Shi Yang to Thunder Firmament Star area under Carefree's restriction. It was fate, indeed. Thunder Firmament Star area. Carefree frowned. His soul consciousness flickered. He immediately found the nearest teleport formation and moved away. Thunder Firmament Star area. This was the star area under the Bradley family's management. In the past, this area belonged to a force called the Thunder Firmament League. The Bradley family had invaded this star area and eradicated that league. The small forces of Thunder Firmament Star area had to follow the God Clan and become their subordinates or get killed. Most of the native forces in Thunder Firmament Star area had chosen the first option. They had begun to serve the Bradley family as their masters by collecting and exploiting the precious cultivating materials for them. The rebellious warriors disappeared like the Thunder Firmament League or ran away from Thunder Firmament Star area. Today, the experts of the Bradley family stayed and based in Thunder Firmament Star area with the cooperation of the native forces. The leader of this star area was Haig's uncle from the Bradley family, a second sky of incipient God realm expert called Right. Right was the real overlord of Thunder Firmament Star Area. He ruled the influential native forces of the star area. He stayed and guarded the Thunder Firmament Lake, which was the richest land in the entire star area. He had many beautiful women from different races, made them wear the collar with a silver bell, and crawl on the ground as his beautiful dogs. Right often bragged about this with his peers in the God clan. The Thunder Firmament was created by several light bands that congregated. The water here was transparent without a speck of dust. Several meteorites were floating in the heavenly lake, which had extremely rich earth and heaven energy. The warriors grew a lot of strange flowers and herbs, materials were stacked in piles. Many battleships of the God clan often visited the Thunder Firmament Star Area to transport materials from the native forces to this base or from this base to the Bradley family in ancient Godstar Area. Today, while Wright was having fun in his abode by the heavenly lake, he noticed the situation projected in the divine mirror in the secret chamber. He changed his face and kicked some of his beautiful doggy maids in his way. He was frightened when he stormed into the secret chamber. Shortly after, he knew from the divine mirror in the secret chamber that the new master of the bloodthirsty force had been delivered to his star area. Wright immediately delivered many orders and stirred up the entire sea of stars to find the new master of the bloodthirsty force. The barrier between the star areas. Shi Yang and Ouyang Luo Shuang appeared. This area was a peripheral area of Thunder Firmament Star Area with layers of lightning strikes. Watching carefully, Shi Yang felt familiar with the lightning here. It was very similar to the immemorial Thunder Dragon of Heavenly Monster Tribe. The immemorial Thunder Dragon was one of the monster ancestors of Heavenly Monster Tribe. This ancestor had fallen a very long time ago. However, legends say that after the immemorial Thunder Dragon was killed, its soul divided into many wisps and scattered around the universe. The Heavenly Monster Tribe used to search and try to collect the dragon's wisps to resurrect him. Unfortunately, the Heavenly Monster Tribe had searched for many years, but they couldn't find the immemorial Thunder Dragon's soul to resurrect it. Of course, this mission was postponed to forever. He had fused with the origin of the Grace mainland, so he knew many secrets of the Heavenly Monster Tribe. That's how he knew about the legends of the immemorial Thunder Dragon. Today, Shi Yang felt touched when he observed the lightning beams generating in this Thunder Firmament Star Area. He vaguely felt that the lightning beams in this Thunder Firmament Star Area were the wisps of the immemorial Thunder Dragon's soul. The expert that had delivered him here should know this and have some plan too. Shi Yang knew that the one who had sent him to Thunder Firmament Star Area was, of course, an expert cultivating space power Upanishad at a profound level. He understood that this expert's realm should be equal to Carefree. Otherwise, he couldn't have done that. And now, if he wanted to return to Grace Mainland, he could do it with just a flick of his thoughts. But Shi Yang wasn't hurried. He knew that the other had sent him to the peripheral area of the Thunder Firmament Star Area where he could discover the secret of the immemorial Thunder Dragon through the lightning here for some reason. Does he want me to collect the immemorial Thunder Dragon's soul? Shi Yang thought and frowned. Eventually, he thought of an idea. His spirit shuddered as if he had just woken up from some magical state. He was bewildered for a while. He pulled himself together and sensed carefully. His expression looked special as he found that the bottleneck that had stopped him from entering second sky of incipient God realm was gone. The confusing parts that he didn't understand when cultivating the star, space, and life and death powers Upanishads became so clear. He got the feeling that as long as he accumulated enough God power, he could break through again. He quickly recognized that it was related to the inexplicable transformation of his soul in the fantasy zone. But he wasn't so sure. He knew something had happened to him because he could feel the subtle changes in his soul and life magnetic field. He couldn't tell what had happened and what it was, but he knew it happened. He turned to Ouyang Luo Shuang, jolted up, and gave a forced smile. Ouyang Luo Shuang gazed at him. Her bright eyes were so chilling. Shi Yang realized that Ouyang Luo Shuang was still confined. She couldn't talk or move. It wasn't different from being chained by the primordial spirit lock. He hurried to lift up the restriction. Then, he didn't wait for Ouyang Luo Shuang to nag him. He discreetly used his life power Upanishad and sent a beam of vitality to Ouyang Luo Shuang's body to heal her wound and make her abdomen even tougher than before Shi Yang had stabbed her. After that essence of life disappeared, Shi Yang paled and spread his arms to admit his mistake. "All right, my bad. You can do anything you want to me." After Ouyang Luo Shuang was released, she didn't attack or scold him. She just glared at him coldly. However, under her gaze, Shi Yang felt embarrassed because it was his mistake. He stooped his head and didn't dare to look at her. He behaved and admitted his fault. Ouyang Luo Shuang just looked at him like this for a long time. It was so long that Shi Yang was about to crack before she rose her voice. "I just want to ask one question. If my teacher attacked you, would you kill me or not?" It was the one question she had thought about all the time when they were traveling. It was also what she was most concerned about. Shi Yang lifted his head, his eyes puzzled. He quieted down. After a long moment, he whispered, "I don't actually know. Shi Yang, what kind of man you are?" Ouyang Luo Shuang sighed, her eyes complicated. "You can leave now. We shouldn't meet later. You're the Heavenly King Carefree's disciple and I'm the master of the bloodthirsty force. We can't stay together like this." Shi Yang looked at her and sighed inwardly. "I'm Carefree's disciple. Why do you want to let me go? Aren't you afraid that I will kill you later?" Ouyang Luo Shuang was bewildered, her heart touched. "You are you and he is him. You guys are different in my eyes," said Shi Yang. "Yes, I am me, and he is him. It's true. So what are you afraid of? Even if we meet later, I'm still Ouyang Luo Shuang. I'm not a member of the God clan. And you're Shi Yang, not the bloodthirsty forces master something. What are you worried about?" Ouyang Luo Shuang was puzzled. Shi Yang was astounded. He immediately understood her idea through her words. He nodded in agreement. "Yeah, that's right." Chapter 1292, The Chen Family. Chapter 1292, The Chen Family. Ouyang Luo Shuang hadn't left because Shi Yang didn't have much energy remaining. He had consumed a lot of his god power for the trip. Shi Yang didn't ask her to leave as he thought that it was good to have someone protect him now. It was true that he had consumed a lot of energy. By the barriers of Thunder Firmament Star area, he gathered his spirit to see the lightning bolts flash at the barrier. He was so surprised. Now, he could confirm that the lightning here was the wisps of the immemorial Thunder Dragon's soul. However, he didn't know how to resurrect it. He was puzzled. If that expert knew that was the immemorial Thunder Dragon's soul and wanted to revive the immemorial Thunder Dragon, he should have let Heavenly Monster Tribe know about this, especially the Holy Beast Azure Dragon. Why did he want to bring Shi Yang here? Shi Yang didn't understand. The immemorial Thunder Dragon was one of the ancestors of Heavenly Monster Tribe. Although he didn't have the unique echelon in Heavenly Monster Tribe like the four holy beasts, he was still just as important. With the continent's origin and the memories of the White Tiger and Vermilion Bird, he knew the secrets of Heavenly Monster Tribe. He knew that Vermilion Bird used to fight the immemorial Thunder Dragon and couldn't defeat him. If the monster ancestors of Heavenly Monster Tribe could live until now, they should be at the immortal realm. Once the soul of the immemorial Thunder Dragon was gathered and restored, Heavenly Monster Tribe would have another immortal realm warrior. Also, Shi Yang was sure that Heavenly Monster Tribe would stand on his side. He suddenly understood. This immemorial Thunder Dragon could be a special arrangement that someone had kept here and was waiting for someone to resurrect the dragon. The immemorial Thunder Dragon was a creature born in Grace Mainland during the immemorial epoch. It had used the Origin's power of the continent. The Origin is structured with the Heaven Flames. Oh, the Heaven Flames, the world-extinguishing Thunder Flame, the immemorial Thunder Dragon, Origin. He frowned and tried to find a way to resurrect the immemorial Thunder Dragon. He seemed to grab the key element. His eyes brightened. Someone is coming. Ouyang Luo Shuang furrowed her bold brows, screaming. "No need to mind them," Shi Yang said casually. Ouyang Luo Shuang didn't say anything else. She stood upright beside him and looked at him quietly, her bright eyes a little strange. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The The 3 gold war chariots like beetles maneuvered near them and accelerated toward them. The war chariots carried 12 warriors, 4 on each vehicle. The strongest of them were at ethereal god realm and the rest were at original god realm. They were from a native force of Thunder Firmament Star Area and were working around the Star Area barrier. Receiving Wright's orders, they had to push their patrolling teams in this area. As they had Shi Yang's drawing, they recognized him when they saw him by the barrier. The 3 war chariots hurried to approach them. The 2 first sky of ethereal god realm on the other war chariot looked at the highest realm warrior in this group, an expert at second sky of ethereal god realm. That expert had gold hair that was flying with the wind. She was a mature woman. Although she looked mild, her eyes were so wise. However, she had an ugly scar across her face. That scar started from the corner of the left eye to the right corner of her mouth. It made her charming face fearsome. She looked at Shi Yang and Ouyang Luo Shuang in the distance and, her face heavy. "Madame Lei, he's the man in the picture," said Chen De Qiao, a fat, pale warrior. The woman he had addressed Madame Lei was called Chen Lei. This group of warriors was from the Chen family dwelling in this remote area of Thunder Firmament Star Area. They were living on a level 4 life star. Although the earth and heaven energy here wasn't rich, this area had many precious natural products and mineral stars. The Bradley family had sent a troop to their life star to enslave the Chen family. The warriors of the Chen family had to exploit the ores for them. Chen Lei was the younger sister of the current chief of the Chen family. She had the second sky of ethereal god realm cultivation base, which ranked right behind her brother Chen Rong. Chen Lei had based on those mineral stars year-round. Today, as Wright had ordered, she left the base and brought some warriors to this remote barrier area to patrol. She thought that she just needed to come here and move around before returning. She hadn't expected that she could find the one who Wright wanted. As the Bradley family had invaded this star area, it had cut off the connection with the world out there. As the Chens were living in an isolated star area, they didn't know the turbulent commotions in the universe lately. They didn't know that the bloodthirsty force and the God clan were about to fight each other. But Chen Lei wasn't dumb. She knew the one Wright wanted to find wasn't someone they could offend. Thus, even though she knew he was the one they wanted to find, she didn't dare to move. Her face grimaced as she hissed, "De Qiao, don't talk nonsense or report it." Chen De Qiao nodded and followed her orders. His hand clutching the sound stone relaxed. The warriors of the Chen family looked at Chen Lei and waited for her decision. As the others were looking at her, Chen Lei took a deep breath. Her face became respectful. She flew out of the war chariot alone and slowly moved towards Shi Yang. "I am Chen Lei from the Chen family on a level 4 life star in the Thunder Firmament Star Area. Greetings." Wright had given them only a drawing without a name. Thus, she recognized Shi Yang, but she couldn't address him. Ouyang Luo Shuang's eyes were clear but cold. She had found Chen Lei's team earlier. She had asked Shi Yang what to do with them. Shi Yang told her to consider everything and just do what she wanted. She hesitated whether she should kill them all or not. She wasn't an innocent girl anymore. After many years moving in the Sea of Stars, she had experienced many sinister events. She knew how to protect herself in a special situation. Sometimes, killing people to survive wasn't a knot in her mind. She thought that it was inevitable. She had adapted well to this mad world. "You guys better not use the sound stone. Otherwise, you shouldn't dream about continuing your lives." Ouyang Luo Shuang's cold eyes glared at Chen De Qiao's hand hiding in his sleeve. "Put away your sound stone." Chen Lei was a little shaken. She hurried to order her troopers. The Chen warriors hurried to follow her order. They all looked frightened. They were very far from each other, but Ouyang Luo Shuang could recognize that they were holding the sound stone. It made them scared and feel unsafe. And now, they felt lucky because of Chen Lei's wisdom. If they had acted normally and reported to the Bradley family right when they saw them, they would have become corpses now. Chen Lei was astounded. Although she was at second sky of ethereal god realm, she felt a massive pressure as if she was beholding an imposing mountain range after she had come near to Ouyang Luo Shuang. She felt dispirited as if she couldn't wiggle. She was so baffled, but she could confirm immediately that this cold girl was at incipient god realm. This finding made her more insecure. Tell them to come here. We need to ask for more information. We don't even know where we are. It's a little troublesome, though. Shi Yang rubbed his chin and frowned. Come here, all of you. Ouyang Luo Shuang gave a light shout. Chen Lei led her troop. Before the warriors of the Chen family arrived, she said, I just said that this place is in Thunder Firmament Star area. We're from the Chen family living around here. We've received Sir Wright's order to check this area. He wants to find you. I saw the picture you keep. I'm the one you want to find. Okay, now tell me. Who is Wright? Tell me the current situation of this place, said Shi Yang indifferently. As Shi Yang cultivated space power Upanishad, even though he consumed a lot of his energy, it wasn't hard to check the moves of low-realm warriors like Chen Lei. However, Chen Lei's team was panic-stricken when they knew that Shi Yang could see every small move of them. Chen De Qiao hurried to explain, No, we haven't reported anything. We don't. I know. Otherwise, you would be dead now. Shi Yang's face was impatient. Looking at Chen Lei, he said, You. Explain to us. 3,000 years ago, the Bradley family of the God Clan had invaded our Thunder Firmament Star area. Then, we've become their dependent star area. Currently, Wright of the Bradley family controls our star area. Wright has second sky of incipient God realm cultivation base. Chen Lei reported in detail the events and the situations in Thunder Firmament Star area. She had even stressed on Wright's evil, corrupted, and greedy behaviors. She even told them that he kept a lot of beautiful women and made them his pet dogs. While talking, she carefully noticed Shi Yang's expression as she wanted to get more information. Shi Yang frowned. After listening to her, he nodded. Sir, why did you come to our Thunder Firmament Star area? Wright wants to find you. Is it because you are against them? Chen Lei pried. Before the God Clan's invasion, the Chen family could be considered rich. With many natural products in this remote area, they had quiet and relaxed lives. When the Bradley family came, their doomsday came together. Chen Lei and Chen Rong's precursors were killed in the battle against the God Clan. Chen Rong and Chen Lei knew that they couldn't defeat the God Clan. To maintain the family, they had to be subdued. Recently, Chen Rong and Chen Lei were abused so badly. Today, they even didn't have enough divine crystals to cultivate. The ores that they had exploited were all brought away massively and unceasingly. They couldn't have a bit of it, so they wanted to take revenge. However, they weren't strong enough to resist, so they had to endure this terrible situation. As Chen Lei knew Ouyang Luo Shuang had the incipient God realm cultivation base, she had an idea. She wanted to borrow their forces to do something. Thus, she was so cooperative. Did anything strange used to happen in this barrier area? Since your Chen family always lives here, I guess you should know something. Shi Yang didn't answer Chen Lei's question, frowning and asking. Although he could confirm that the lightning beams in this area were wisps of the immemorial Thunder Dragon's soul, he didn't know where the dragon's body was. If he wanted to revive the immemorial Thunder Dragon, he needed its corpse too besides collecting the soul. If he could find the corpse with the method he just thought of in his head, he was 70% sure that he could resurrect the immemorial Thunder Dragon. Anything strange? A lot. What do you want to know? Asked Chen Lei. The events related to the lightning and thunder. Is there any mountain range that suddenly has lightning and thunder, and suddenly produces a lot of crystals with lightning and thunder attribute? Shi Yang said directly. Chen Lei's eyes brightened, her face surprised. Oh, you're right. Something strange had happened as you said. My ancestor had recorded something like that. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.